But otherwise, we have a lot of similarities, and I especially appreciate the time we spent together on the Policy and Governance Committee and just on council in general. So I have to say, I'm going to miss you.
I'll still get to see you, so it won't really hurt my feelings so much. We appreciate everything you've done for us.
So I wanted to say how much I admire what you're doing to take this step as far as making sure that your agent place, and a lot to me because of what I'm going through. So I just wish you the best of luck and everything. And I hope your in-laws know how great you are for the news.
Yeah, I also am going to miss you. Obviously we campaigned together and had a great time getting to know you and Chad and your family. But you're doing it for all the same reasons I would do it too. For family, for a situation beyond yourself. And I appreciate your time and effort because it's not easy to do what we're all doing here. And appreciate you putting yourself out there, but it's a great reason to take a step back, help family out. So good luck with that, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Sure, this wasn't an easy decision for you. I'm sure it was very difficult, but as everybody has said, we're doing it and for the right reasons. It's a decision that I wish I could have made up to a month ago. So, but best of luck and Godspeed and everything you do in the future. Would you like to address council? No, she's good. She's good. Would you like to be excused from the meeting? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Good luck, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See ya.
Have a great
Later,
night.
Gator.
Well, like that, you're like gone now.
You don't need my opinion anymore. It
Wow.
will just blur the lines, right? Best of luck, guys.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
All right, we're gonna move into presentations. First up is the BREED Act recommendations. I'll invite Michelle Claymore, Economic Development Director, to introduce the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas and City Council members. So tonight's study session is to share recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Economic Development Advisory Committee, or what we've been referring to as BREED Act. J.R. Writings with Comcast Technology Solutions was originally going to present along with BREED Act member Tom Kaufman, who is the Executive Director of Land and Investment with Antonov and Company Brokerage. However, Mr. Writings is ill tonight, so I will be doing his part of the presentation, and then Tom's going to pick up the rest of it. We respectfully request that you allow us to present all of the committee's recommendations tonight first, and then we can answer any questions you have at the end of the presentation. Thank you. So Resolution 2021-58, the Commerce City Blue Ribbon Economic Development Advisory Committee, or BREED Act, was established by City Council with the passage of Resolution 21-58. And it was to evaluate and advise City Council regarding economic development best practices and strategies to attract resident and visitor-serving businesses primarily, and to elevate Commerce City's profile from an economic development perspective. The resolution also identified how the committee should which of the various segments of the business and residential community should be represented. So 2 representatives from large business or large undeveloped properties, 3 representatives from mid-sized businesses, 3 representatives from small businesses. Next slide, would you please? 2 residents with special experience in economic development, marketing, or related fields, 1 more. And then 2 members of City Council, and of course we've got Council Member Douglas and Council Member Noble, and 1 non-residential real estate broker with familiarity of Commerce City. Next slide.
I'm on there.
Thanks. So this is the list of the committee members that were chosen to serve. We had Jimmy Burrs with Color Graphics. We had Dennis Knack, who's also here with us tonight from Southwest Commercial Capital. Shanika Carter, Carter Truck Driving Academy. Theodora Castrojohn from Ted's Philly Cheesesteaks. Chris Chippendale from Ent Credit Union. Of course, Council Member Christy Douglas. Jim Hayes, Oakwood Homes, Tom Kaufman, Antonoff and Company, Councilmember Susan Noble, Louis Ortiz from Stillwater Wellness Center, JR Writings, Comcast Technology Solutions, Matthias, Sweldo, oh, I'm sorry, Matthias, from Fleet Management Services, and Brian Theobald with Cronky Sports and Entertainment. So that was the list of the committee members. Next slide, please. REDAC members met monthly from January through September of this year. Speakers were invited to present on various topics, providing the committee with information and existing market conditions, city programs and processes, and community and economic development practices. During the monthly meetings, several discussion themes did emerge. And these themes were loosely categorized under a SWOT analysis chart, or as Commerce City strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is not a comprehensive list. These were just common themes that were discussed by committee members. And to go through these, Mr. Kaufman is going to take the presentation from here. So.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Mayor, Councilman, civil servants, and all the guests that have arrived here today to kind of listen to what so many people in the community kind of gathered to kind of help support and promote growth here going forward in Commerce City. You know, we started off, like Michelle said, with the SWOT analysis. I'm not going to go through all the topics, but some of the bigger ones just to get everybody on a level playing field and the public that's listening in. You know, we started off with our strengths, the population growth. You guys are positioned right here in Commerce City for a tremendous amount of growth. The growth has been coming. It will continue to come. Transportation and major highways. You have a lot of rail, transportation, intermodal, just the ability to get around in the city of Commerce City is just amazing. The other thing is just the outdoor space. You know, the trails, the parks, the wildlife refuge, the quality of the assets here, the quality of life. People like to be here, and you guys intermingle great with the activities and the needs of your citizens. Some of the weaknesses, you know, everyone always kind of cringes on those. You know, there's a lingering, you know, negative image for some of the industrial dirty air. If you drive through, you know, down I-70 at the airport, you smell, you know, Brina, and then you smell a pot shop, and then sometimes that stink kind of, you know, people get reminded. But, you know, we're here to make a positive thing of these negatives and take advantage of the industries that are making those things and produce jobs and opportunities for the citizens here. The development process, the review process right now, I'm a commercial broker and I've been working up here for almost a quarter of a century. They just get longer. I know everyone says, if you complain now, just wait, California rules are coming this way. But contracts now for development are going out 2 years. I've seen them as far as 4 years going on. This is slowing down, obviously, the growth, the development, the jobs, and the possibility of losing opportunities to other cities and vicinities. Sales tax and the uses in some of the mill levies are high in some areas. So you just got to be cautious. That's kind of a sleeper category where people, when they're buying a new house, they don't realize there's a mill levy on there. But when they get in, then they start complaining. So that's one of the other things. And then just the timing of the overall process, like I mentioned, it's, you know, it's getting long, you know, so, but, you know, switching now to the opportunities, some of the different thing is the infill for retail opportunities, grocery stores, restaurants, hotels. Tower Road, I think is slated to be the second or third busiest road in the greater metro area. That's a phenomenal asset you guys have. It goes into that transportation corridor, but also goes into opportunity, you know, not only for retail, but for primary jobs and access to DIA as well. Leveraging the involvement, the BREDAC committee, you know, just leveraging the community and the council and the resources that you guys have, kind of taking a look internally. And that's a big step. A lot of cities overlook that. They just kind of continue with the growth process. Hey, it's working, you know, as is. We're going to keep going. You guys are actually stepping back and saying, what can we do better? You know, that's a major milestone about, you know, put you in the top 10% of people thinking forwardly and not just reacting to how growth is coming to their city. And then land preservation. You know, I learned a lot through, you know, you guys do have a lot of land preservation now, but how do you preserve it for the future growth? How do you preserve it and plan it for tomorrow? To, create new jobs or create space for growth that we don't know what's going to happen, our new industry, cold storage, items of that will happen. How do you plan and preserve for that as well? That's a big opportunity. Some of the threats are the changing consumer patterns, even from housing nowadays. I'm a member of the Home Builders Association, and we fought for construction defects. We lost our affordable housing for a long time. It's starting to come back now. And you're seeing new things like for rent communities, single family for rent. If you don't like your neighbor and they're not, keeping up their yard, they can get rid of them. It's a newer concept, but there's probably 8 or 9 different large companies looking for 10 to 100 acres to put these things in place. We're going to see those more in Commerce City coming this way. Labor shortages, I'm sure you guys have all seen it, felt it in the quality or the speed of a restaurant or a consumer store trying to get good help. Every small business, in that BREDAC community had mentioned at one point or another, that's an issue. How do we get good quality people? How do we retain them and train them? The rising cost of construction, we've seen wood shoot through the roof, steel shoot through the roof, concrete shoot through the roof. Wood's now coming down, but these costs are all getting transferred back to the people, where the average new home is somewhere in the mid 600s now. That's ridiculous for our kids to, how do our kids afford that? It's, so that's something that would, like I said, it's coming down. I just saw a report saying that we're averaging about 9,000 permits, in the greater Denver area. Our average is about 15 to 16,000. We need to be at 25,000 for the next 8 years to catch the gap right now. We are still behind on housing. Some of the COVID, some of the recession, some of this inflation, we're still falling short on our housing needs there. So that's one of the threats that, somehow we have to address and plan for. In your packet, you've kind of got some additional information. So in addition to the discussion themes, committee members developed a list of recommendations, considerations of 3 different things, the 3 Ps, the programs, policies, and promotions to meet the committee's objective. We came up with over 20 of them. And we didn't agree on all of them, but I think generally most of them work. Most of them need to be ironed out a little bit, and we're here to present what those are going to be. And then we also put them into short, medium, long-term ranges. We figured a little success early on goes a long way, and it makes you kind of feel good about what you're doing. So it's getting some of these short terms set up to happen, and where you can see progress. It's like the line going straight. If you vary a little bit, you make a big difference down the road. So those little ones we'll start off with, and then go into the medium and the more large ones. So each recommendation was put into an area category. I'm going to go over those next. So first one, city land use and new development policies. I call it zone for what is wanted, zone for what is needed. So utilize clearly defined mixed zoning definitions. If that includes housing, it includes housing. So is it mixed use commercial, mixed use residential, mixed use industrial? But know what those zonings are. Make it clear to the people what you want and where you want it. Increase city engagement. I found the people of Commerce City want to help. This committee donated tons of hours. I looked around the room and said, I wonder what the hourly rate to have these people in here. So thank your citizens, and they're here to help. They really want that to happen. Create targeted code amendments that allow quicker changes for existing PUDs. Some of these plans coming out. I sold colleagues their land. They've got several thousand acres. I think I sold them 7 different pieces on there. Those plans are going to change over time. They're going to be in those, 20 or 30 years. And as you guys are seeing it, evolution is happening. It's happening at a hockey stick type rate. So you're going to see new opportunities, new threats, new weaknesses. So we got to keep our eyes on not only what we have, how it's evolving, but how do you plan for what you don't know yet? And you got to have that openness to be flexible to do that. Explore ways to lower those mill levy rates. We had a couple of the ideas of, there's basically 3 knobs that you can do. You can do the price, the interest, or the time. So one of the ideas was, can you run out the mill levies at a longer time? can you also separate them between residential and commercial uses to apply the right kind of pressure on the right kind of use? So those were some of the things. And then the last one was hire a third-party consultant to update the strategic plan. Sometimes getting a fresh set of eyes or someone who specializes at doing that. Sometimes we're just in the forest. And when you hire somebody outside who does that for a living, they've seen 8, 9, 10, 12, 20 different cities that have gone through this, what worked, what didn't work. It makes, the efficiency level goes way up by doing that. So we thought that would be an excellent idea. The next one, retail development process, tools, and incentives. Everyone talks about incentives. I think Texas gives them out the best. They give them out like candy, but I know there's some limitations with those. But what we want to do is get the incentives that increase the competitiveness by automating development. So we know that garbage in is garbage out. But if we place that nuance on the developer to come in, if it's automated, they know they can check the boxes, they can get through it quickly, and they can get a good result, or they get a bing back with a red flag saying, did not meet standard. So they get their feedback quickly and move through that process, and then we work on knocking that time frame down a little bit. Create developer incentive that encourage higher quality retail development. We had a couple different instances of, a tax assistant, there's TIFs and PIFs, utility cost share programs, sometimes partnering with the city to get what utilities to where they need to be. Financial assistance for developments, low interest rates, more incentives that you guys let the development community know. Commerce City is open for business, and they're going to do what you need. They're going to tailor the program, for your needs, and find a way to work with you to make you not only survive but thrive here in Commerce City. So that's the guiding development. There was a big array of different restaurants, sit-down restaurants, how to come into those. So another one of the ideas is to develop a kitchen utility upgrade plan. I don't know if you guys know the cost of a hood and grease trap. It's through the roof. To get these new restaurants are retrofitting these things into existing buildings. Maybe even exploring the designation of an urban renewal district, that allows those incentives in there where the density and the population is the heaviest. And then further promoting energy efficient programs for existing commercial buildings. It's always, easier to build it, when it's going up, put it in, but it's costly. But I think you have to look at the existing stock and getting that up to par to be competitive, in the greater area. The next thing is new retail. Where do you go shopping? Christmas is coming around. I think we got 12 Sundays left. So it's coming up quick. But this is I call it the don't wait, be aggressive. You don't wait for people to come to you, you go tell them. And that kind of leads into, one of the ideas was, and I'll touch on it again later, the ambassador program, where if you've ever been in a relationship, the best person to sell you is not you, it's your spouse or partner. So the ambassadors, those people that showed up, the people in the community that already know the good things that you guys do for them, and encouraging that program to kind of flourish a little bit. So the other one is, utilize some of the retail trade shows, ICSC. I know you guys have been out there a lot. I've seen you out there. I think we went to dinner one time with Todd Wilson, with a few of you out there. One of the other ideas, increase reach out efforts with site selectors. Let's not wait for them to come to us. Let's find out who they are and get on their map, get on their radar, get the invite out before they know they have a need. And that way, you got to remind them. I tell people that work for me all the time, your phone's not going to ring. You've got to call, you got to let them know that you're here, and you got to give them a reason to call back. So some of these programs are the reason to call back. And it's the niceness and openness that you guys present that makes it just easy for them. People don't want to be stressed. They want, different degrees of housing for their executives, for the workers, for the mid-tier management. And they want the restaurants that you guys want, the same things. They want that quality of life and a sense of place. So that was part of, just be more aggressive going outward than more reactive. And it makes life easier because they can still step back and take time to put out the fires. So existing business industry support. In economic development, it's always easier, I call it clustering. Find out who your guys are already in the city, who are their suppliers. Go invite those guys out here. Say, if your big employers here and you're buying supplies from Illinois, let's get them here. Let's cut down that distribution, cut down the transportation costs. And you've got the distribution because you got the highways and the rail. So you've got that intermode to get things out quickly, but keep the dollars inside, keep it for the people here. So there's the clustering, and then also the incubators, the spin-offs. We just went through COVID. I've been on some different committees, and everybody had a big name card. They were all been consultants now, or they went into real estate and got a broker's license. One of the two. But the incubators for these small guys that are innovative, that are leaving the industry, or you just want to go on their own, start their own companies, give them that opportunity here. Because if they start here, they'll probably grow here. And you can do a small incubator. We were just talking about one coming up from Texas. They're looking for about 10 acres. And then go to the bigger move up stage, and then they go to a primary employer. Is it a 10, 20, 30-year process? Probably, but they're here, and they're easy to reach out to. The next one is the community outreach and engagement. This is something you guys already started doing with the BREED Act committee. And this is, to me, it's the sense of place. You guys, people will tell you what they want if you ask them, and it's how do you get to them? And I think that's what's happening now is we're finding ways to reach out to them, to interact with them. Social media has been one of the primary sources, but direct mail is another one. Is impact.
Thank you, everyone.
Promote local work, local companies here. They should get first track at some of the RFPs that go out. Making those connections with EDC as to, hey, here's two companies, hey, this one's going to work with you. Making that introduction for them because they're busy making their product, and that becomes the mission for the city is to how do you engage what you have existing, make those stronger, make it a spider web, a business interlocked together. Create a short questionnaire. People, if it's 10 questions or less, I'd rather see 3 of those going out, and I think the committee would, versus one with 40 questions that people aren't going to finish. So small briefs, just little peeks at the window, getting out to the primary owners, the businesses, and the people, seeing what they need, seeing what kind of store that they want, and what kind of businesses they want to be being here. We came up with 20 different solutions, different timelines, 3 different phases. I would suggest, let's not drop this. Let's keep it going somehow. Either, keep BREED Act going or create a new committee, but take these ideas, don't let them sit on the wayside. Take those short little wins. It'll feel good. And you'll see a lot of results from those. The final is what I call, it's marketing and public relations. I call it next level marketing and action items. Develop an award-winning marketing strategy. Something that you can brag about. There's enough people out there and agencies out there that will recognize once you put that framework in, and we've started the framework, put that in place, advertise it. Cities will come to you and ask you, how'd you do it? You'll be the example. And you can see the growth coming in from that. Promote Commerce City as a city of commerce in the region. It's in the name. We're open for business. And we want these businesses to grow. We want them to do through the clustering. We want them to do new primary jobs. And we want to have the support stuff for the people that live it. And know in these policies that you're going to need X amount of houses from that site selector to get this type of store. So let's find those areas and present, hey, here's 3 different areas. If your criteria, you go to ICSC, one of these marketing, the big one out in Las Vegas, they tell you, we need X amount of population. And then we'll go there. Identify those 3 and say, hey, here's the opportunities, buy these 3 things that fit you. We're making it easy for you. You don't have to go run these programs, you just got to verify. Develop Commerce City Brand Ambassador Program. Again, this is the whole, your spouse is a better salesperson than you are of yourself. People that believe in you, people that have had success here. And when people come tour, have them go meet a couple owners, have them meet them in the same, business size or business, industry. Have those people say what works, what doesn't work, and have them be honest about it. That's the big thing, the communication and the honesty with the existing people. And with this program, you get an award-winning program out there, you will have that, and you will have those champions. Those are the ambassadors of the city, and maybe even integrate that to someone who leads it through the city process. Hey, here's how we get through here a little quicker. Here's a little smoother where we can, instead of 18 months, we can get it down to 15 months. It's a lot of money for a new business coming here, and it's a lot of revenue on there. And you're doing what the other cities around here aren't doing. They're expanding their timeframes. They're expanding their cost. They're looking at the developers as, you're not residents, we're gonna charge you more fees. And you're in it for the long haul. You're gonna get the people in here and make the money long-term. You're gonna get the residents happy. You're gonna create that sense of place, which everyone is identifying. From Reunion started way back in Commerce City a few years ago is, oh, I'm in Reunion. I'm a Derby guy. They want that sense of place to acknowledge who they are. It becomes their lifestyle. So it's a live, work, play situation. So that's kind of what we've been through. There's a little bit more depth, in your packets, and we'll be open for questions. There's a couple of us here. And any thoughts, considerations, questions, concerns?
Well, I'll start us off. I did write down a couple things, but great presentation. I appreciate you coming and giving these recommendations, and I appreciate the work and the hours that were volunteered put into this by our community, by people who don't live in the community, just do business here, our council members. So thank you. Couple questions about, just from your perspective, and anybody, how do partnering with potentially our competitors, how does that look? What I'm referring to is like AC Rep and some of the kind of regional economic development groups. I'm split on that. We're competing with some of the people that are in that group, but it also generates, larger groups of people to come in with interest in the area and maybe haven't picked the location yet. And so how is participating in something like that, do you see that as beneficial or something we should stay away
I
from?
see it highly beneficial. It's team tackling and playing. A lot of people use Metro EDC for some of those leads. I think you create your own program, but you also, if a neighboring city gets somebody with a lot of jobs, they're gonna come over here. They're gonna spend money in your restaurants and in your retail. I think on the bigger ones, yeah, you've got to team tackle with a couple cities. You've got to know what the neighbors are doing and what they're not doing, so you can fill the gaps. So when the person comes in, we did it with Hudson, Kingsburg, up there in Lock Bowie, all three of them always on the EDI up there. And, Lock Bowie has no commercial. Hudson, does, and Kingsburg wanted industrial. So you kind of focus in there, and the person comes in, or you reach out to them, or they reach out to them, they say, hey, this might be a better fit. And sometimes that's the best thing you can do, because that person's gonna remember, hey, they helped us, but they realized maybe they didn't have the right resources to. So put them in what they need. If you put their needs first, it's gonna come back tenfold, because that guy in that industry is gonna tell the neighboring guys or supporting guys, hey, relocate out here. Commerce City had this piece of ground. We needed 50 acres, that's 30, it's perfect for you. So I think team tackling and knowing and reaching out to those groups and having some of those ambassadors maybe sit in on some of those guys and see what their plans are, I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, and I think AC Rep, the reason I brought that up, the Adams County, is that for those reasons, like, hey, there could be other spots, but also just have that unification of, with the county and trying to bring everybody together. So we're working together towards a goal, because I think even the county has some stuff that they're promoting that's really in our growth area if you get down to it. So, but Aurora A-List, I went to that by an invite, and there was hundreds of businesses there. And I said, well, this is a good opportunity for us, to do something on our own, yeah, of course we can. But if we could, we're not Aurora, we're not that large, but if we could start something like that, I thought that would also be good. One of the other things that I think this is just for everybody is how often or how can we continue to update our data? One of the things that struck me over the last 6 months, let's say, so I started looking at our population and our population growth, and you compare us to Brighton, as one of our, biggest competitors, just from a geographic perspective. North Commerce City has just under the total amount of population that the whole city of Brighton has. So, how can we use that to promote ourselves? Yes, they have some prime location on I-76 that really kind of hinders our growth in the north, but at what point does the density of North Commerce City overtake, that hindrance of the Prairie Center and start to create our own foundation for that commercial growth? And so, how do we continue to update our data so we can continue to get that message out to developers to say, hey, we understand your population circles always have us kind of, coupled with Brighton, but look at this new data that's showing the population density means you should probably develop here at 104th and Tower or whatever, instead of going up there because all your growth is happening here now.
There's firms like the old Metro study that'll project how many houses are permitted in an area. We've used those to kind of lure people out, like McDonald's and guys like that earlier, showing here's the rooftops that are planned right now. So if you start working now, you're doing construction, you're gonna go through the planning process, you're a year and a half there, you're a year, 9 months to build, but in the meantime, here's the rooftops that are coming, and if they've already started, you can quickly add up. It's a national builder, they're targeting 3.5 per unit, and they're driving 3 per series for growth estimates. So you can start to see, hey, they already started. KB Homes got 3 different products. That's 9 homes a month coming in there. So that's 2.5 people times 9 times the 3 builders in a master plan. And you can kind of foreshadow that. Prairie Center jumped out way ahead on the retail side of things. They had some pretty deep pockets sponsoring, obviously. But to recover from that, you can. And then you strategically know those things on the data set. This is just me speaking. I think you run about an 80% accuracy and you focus on the places that are moving and hot. If you're trying to do 100%, you're not going to get anything done. You're too worried about the data and not getting the deals done.
Makes sense.
So you kind of slow down a little bit on that until what's moving, and then you focus on that, concentrate, move that up, and then just keep going and by the awareness campaign.
All right, and the last one I have for you, how impactful are the things that we don't control? And what I mean by that is we don't control all of your property taxes. And I'm trying to say this nicely because we have great partners, but we don't control our water. And those tap fees matter in a growth situation, especially if city to city we're equivalent, but then you add that tap fee and now all of a sudden Aurora's $200,000 less on your development fees. And so
$70,000 to $90,000 per home. That's before you put a stick in the ground or pay for the ground. It is impactful, but you got to play with the cards that you're given. So if you've got a weak spot here, you can't give incentives on that like somebody else might be able to. Thornton just ran out of water for the longest time. Erie, Thornton, Aurora, they were all, we got water. Aurora's still touting that. And that was their strong card. So you find your strong card to counter that. Get 2 strong cards or get 3 different opportunities. Yeah, we don't have this, but we've got the low income housing. We could bump our middle levy rates out now to 45 years. So here's play the strengths that you have and acknowledge it. But don't let that hindrance you.
thank you, I appreciate it, great answers.
I'm curious, I forgot her name, but the lady was an economic consultant for the city. She's the one that told us nothing wants to come to Commerce City. So I'm just curious, why wasn't she on the REDAC committee?
I was asked to join and I don't know that answer.
So she is on.
She was a student speaker.
Oh, okay. And then has you guys ever explored like the possibility of a business fair? Like to try to attract more businesses to
Yeah,
Commerce?
in some of our reports that was mentioned as to how to get people out here, how to get tours from either the brokers, and they do even like golfing little events where there's one little activity in 3 or 4 different spots, and then a lunch afterwards. You get the people from Denver, they're all sitting in downtown Denver, or most of them, well, the brokerage and the site selectors are there. The builders are down south farther, but you get those guys to come up here and do the fairs, do those little events, tour them, show them, highlight them, highlight the spots that you guys want focused in the industries that you want, invite those players out to see it. They might not be your target person. You know, I do commercial, but as residential, the people coming into your open house they're someone to farm for a client to go into another house. And that's what you do with those, is you get those fairs, you get those people in, and they know people. You know, they're in the industry, they're in the associations. They'll start talking and they'll hear they're getting good, honest feedback, and you're tailoring it. You know, you got to sit them down, get them in, and listen to what their needs are. And if you start tailoring them towards their needs and you're honest, and if you can't help them, you say, you know, maybe you go to Brighton this time and we'll get the next one. But you be honest, and then you highlight, again, the best positions that you got.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate it. And Dennis Kamak is here too. Appreciate Dennis being here. It was really a great experience to go through these several months with all of you. I learned a lot. It was a very fascinating experience. I did want to add that I am the council's representative to AC Rep. And we recently did a URA field trip up I-25, and there was a lot of cooperation between the cities. Wendy Knopfsinger is here, and she was part of that trip as well. And they were talking about the fact that sometimes a business doesn't fit in one community and it fits better in another, and they're very cooperative that way. There's the competition, it doesn't work that way in the economic development world. And also we have Aerotropolis, which is another cooperative effort that we have along E470 as well with the county, Aurora, Brighton, Thornton, North Glen. So that's great. One thing that came up to mind for me too was, if we build more homes, then what if those residents are traveling outside of the city to go to work? They're not here during the day to shop. They're not here during the day to use restaurants. So one of the things that I recall that I would like to just reemphasize, and I know it's among the things you mentioned, were the primary jobs. And that was actually, primary, secondary was a terminology that was new to me, frankly. And the primary jobs are the ones that keep you here, and the secondary jobs are the ones that support the people who are working the primary jobs. So, and that comes back to the land preservation issue again. So if we have zoning for particular kinds of businesses, but it's becoming residential or whatever the case is, then we are actually not preserving land for those opportunities. And it's something to look at as well. Where will the primary jobs be and what kind of jobs? Discussion was around high technology, for example, and that kind of thing to just sort of help in the part of the discussion of reversing the image, if you will, or enhancing the image of Commerce City as a center of commerce. But I think most of all, I just really want us as a city council to be able to harness the energy, the enthusiasm, and the expertise of the members who were on BREDAC, so that those who wish to and others who want to join them can continue in another form. And then, whether you decide you want city council members involved, whoever those city council members may be, I have no ownership of that in any fashion. I'm just really happy that this has happened and we've gotten to this point, and we have the report. There's a lot of good information for us to deal with now.
Yeah.
So thank you, Tom.
Yeah, and some of the ways, with the housing is you can tailor it to, here's a 100-acre plan. Let the developer make some money in the housing. There's trigger numbers. And once they get to a trigger number, now you got to start your commercial, because we know it works, So there's some ways like that. And thank you for all the help and time and effort. I know everyone here acknowledges all your hard work on this as well. So thank you. Anybody else with questions, thoughts, concerns? Now let's,
Am I allowed?
yeah, as long as it's positive, no.
I'm in the,
He's on the committee.
yeah. I have a pretty lengthy background in economic development. You know, I studied in college back in 1904 and.
Dennis, could I ask you oh, you can't see Tom anyway on the screen.
So he can sit there.
Where we can see you.
Why?
It's over Tom's shoulder.
Also, the microphones will pick you up better over here.
That's scary. So I was honored when they asked me, because I've been talking in various arenas in the city about economic development for the 10 years that I've been on the planning commission. And one of the things that I have seen that works in other communities is aggressive outbound marketing. And I just got the feeling that we don't do that as well as we could. We can get the right zonings, we can do all of the, be prepared to help people with the economic side and all of that kind of stuff, but we have to shout it loud and long, the best. And I think Michelle would agree with this, the best people at economic development around the country are good salesmen. And I think it's important that we not only come up with the right plans and programs that make it easy for people to come to us, but we need to go out and shout it and really be aggressive. That's why I thought that having a consultant that tells us maybe we can bring some new ideas of how we do that would be very beneficial to the community. Because you're absolutely right, Susan, when you bring primary jobs in, restaurants, the gas stations and all those other things are secondary jobs, and they'll come because they can make money. If you don't have the primary jobs in your community, then people will go outside to work, and their retail dollars and their entertainment dollars will follow. And so outbound marketing, and I don't think we said it strong enough in the report, my opinion, that outbound marketing for primary jobs just has to be better for us for the long term. Does that make sense to everybody?
Thank you, sir.
That's,
Yeah, thanks for
yeah.
sharing it. You've got a wealth of knowledge that you brought to our committee. So it's always good to hear from you.
Yeah, I just had a thought to, I'm not sure I'm closing it out, but just to close out my thoughts. I'm gonna advocate for something moving forward. I don't know exactly what that is yet. And I'm gonna pull from my experience, but at CDOT, we have certain committees that hold advisory status. And I would say here at the city, every board and commission has some sort of advisory status to city council. We care what they have to say is all that really means. But I would love to see a group meet at least quarterly from outside to give us that perspective. When you talked about we're in the forest, we absolutely are, for the good and the bad. We are easy to highlight some of the bad, and it's easy to highlight some of the good. And sometimes just getting that outside perspective, that kind of unfiltered, but also not in it every day perspective is huge for our ability to become better salespeople. So sometimes the best sales pitch that I have for Commerce City didn't start from any of us in this room. It started from a perspective that I got from somebody else that has very little day-to-day knowledge of what Commerce City is and might actually have a bad, perception of our city. But they point out something that's fantastic, and we try to run with it. And so I don't know. Of course, we're not making motions tonight. It's just discussion, but I think Councilwoman Noble's idea was fantastic to start. I think the recommendations that you guys put forward are incredibly valuable for us for moving forward. But to stop it, I think would be a huge disservice to not just this council, but future councils, to our staff, and to the developers that we want to continue to partner with moving forward. I think, creating and maintaining that relationship and having a trustful two-way conversation consistently is probably the recipe for success that we're talking about here. And so I don't know, we have other members of council that I'm sure are just as interested in seeing this move forward. And so hopefully we can put our minds together and find something that works. The reason I say quarterly is because I understand how much commitment you all made to this. And once you get something like this under your belt, maybe it's not necessary to meet on a monthly basis, but absolutely at a quarterly level, just to give us feedback, good, bad, indifferent, ugly, whatever, I think is probably the best value we can get from the community right now because it helps us shape our decisions.
I agree. I know the members of the committee would like to see the ball, it started rolling. And now you guys are tasked to, what do we want to do with that ball and which way do we want it to go? So.
And I don't think quarterly is the best. I think monthly is. If you have 20 people and 17 of them show up, then that's better than everybody on a quarterly basis,
Look, for economic development, I'd be okay with it being weekly. I'm just trying to be realistic, and monthly is great. I'm not going to stop that. Actually, I created a quarterly group on trucking at CDOT, and they forced monthly meetings opposed to quarterly because they had a lot to say. And it actually works out really well, and it organically kind of grew into something different, which is what I hope to see out of this.
And I think you just apply some of the things that I mentioned and that the group came up with is be flexible on it. Kind of get a group and be open to, bi-monthly or, whatever they need, when they need it. And it'll work itself out that way. But have that flexibility and knowing that that's what's going to, happen in the longer term, that greater strategic award-winning plan.
I can attest to the enthusiasm that I saw, especially towards the end. And it was really gathering steam. So to have people who want to continue it monthly, I think that's.
I won't stop it monthly, trust me. I just didn't want to go over my skis too much,
I think they really realize what potential we have here. Some people may see it as challenges, but if you flip it and look at it as an opportunity, then that's a positive. And we need that here.
Wouldn't it be very fun to work on something that needed zero improvements, right?
Any other questions or thoughts?
So I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for committing your time and your expertise and knowledge and enthusiasm and your love for the city. So thank you.
And Michelle, was a good coordinator and so on and so forth.
Yes, and thank you,
She should
Michelle.
be thanked.
Yeah.
Everyone in the city that we interacted, I think was very positive, outgoing, and really, wanted to listen to us and to put together, an action plan. So it was, thanks to everybody involved in the city. It was phenomenal to get that. Sometimes you get roadblocks, and we didn't really have that. We all kind of had the same synergy. All boats pointed down the same stream. So it was nice.
Yeah, so Michelle, thank you so much. And I hope that you look at us as being partners with you to help you make everything that you do a success and your team as well. So thank you, Mindy, as well.
All right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your involvement in it and your dedication and the readout report. Thank you for being here this evening. We're gonna move on to our next presentation.
Mayor, very quickly. Obviously, we've got our recommendations that we can keep moving forward. But one thing I would only ask the council to be thinking about is how you want some form of BREAD Act to move forward. Because obviously we've come to the end of our resolution for BREAD Act. So if council wants something to be done, have to take action.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna move on to LDC amendments and design regulations. I'll invite Jim Tolbert, Community Development Director, to introduce the presentation.
So I will speak for the director, Steve Timms here. So a couple of months ago, we worked with our legal team to look at updating our sign code and the land development code to make it compliant with state and national laws. And so we have, oh, here they go. We have our consultant, one half of our consultant tonight, Jerry Dahl, who's a fine attorney, municipal attorney and other private attorney. And he is gonna walk through the work that's been done over the past couple months. And Stacy, if you wanna, do you wanna sit or stand, Jerry? What would be better for you?
I can stand. I can just
Okay.
put you.
And then Stacy can control the
If she would.
the tangent. All right, that sounds good. Thank you.
Not yet.
All right. Nice to see you.
I am Sue, right, which makes it even worse.
Yes.
Well, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. And I also appreciate being able to be here early and just kind of get a sense of what you're working on. And interestingly, I think it really does coordinate pretty well with the city's sign program. Signs tell the world who you are, what you have available, and they establish an image of the city. They truly do. And the two of the kind of themes that I heard the presenters earlier mention were, actually made a note, support existing businesses, support quality of life. And there's no question that there can be conflicts, right, between those two things. You will get business interests that, in their interest, and I honor that, want to have signs that are even bigger and that flash and that are illuminated, right? Because then you actually see, you pay attention to that business. At the same time, if you're in a residential neighborhood that views that sign or is relatively close to that sign, your quality of life is impacted. So like with everything else we do in our lives, right, we have to make compromises on the goals we try to achieve. And so not any different with the sign code. In any event, before I even get to the consultant team, because that's the next slide, and I don't want to have Stacy go back and forth. This is a great slide because it illustrates one of the things we're trying to accomplish in sign code, which is to make it visual and to make it graphic so that you can actually, as you read it, understand what it is that it's telling you to do if you're the owner of a sign or someone wants to put up a sign. After all, it's the sign code, right? So it really ought to have graphics in it. And that's why we have a graphic person on the team, and I'll show you in a minute. But you will notice these terms, and these terms are really operative in the sign. These are all the terms for the permanent sign types. There's a similar graphic for temporary sign types. Looking at the permanent ones, there's a directional sign that says entrance, right? Awning sign, we all know what those are. Projecting sign comes out from the wall, right? There's a great projecting sign in the town of Morrison, where I'm also the town attorney, that for a beer garden. Okay, now we have a marquee sign, a dwindling sign category that we all remember from the good old days when there were marquees on theaters that we'd go to. We have a kiosk sign, you know what those are. Freestanding sign, that's really a monument sign. And that's really a main sign type. And the monument sign will replace in the sign code, just so you know, the freestanding pole sign, of which there's plenty in the city. The ones that are there now are legal non-conforming, but the direction we've received is we're going to migrate these to the monument sign, which is attached to the ground, and I'll show you an example. Then we've got the canopy sign, gas station canopy, good example. A display sign, you're going through a drive-through and you're ordering the Big Mac with cheese. Can you get it with cheese? No one knows this. That's good. That's good. All right.
The only way you can get it.
That's the only way.
Otherwise, it's not real.
Terrific.
Isn't that a real?
All right. So I think this is helpful. We've got a similar graphic for temporary signs like shark fin signs. You've all seen those. The wooden banner types, inflatable signs, things like that that are by their nature temporary. But we can go to the next slide so you can actually do it here. Your team is myself. I'm an attorney. I'm in a small firm, and all we do is represent local governments. I'm the city attorney for Wheat Ridge, the town attorney from Poncha Springs, believe it or not, way down south, Georgetown, and Morrison. And the other attorneys in my firm represent another 6 or 7 different cities, mostly in the Front Range area and some up towards the mountains. We represent Frisco, I think, is the furthest west. as a city that we're the city or town attorneys for. The other two members of the team are Martin Landers. He's a planner with Plan Tools. And it's got a sort of a sole practitioner, and he's really the smart planner type that injects a lot of the planning elements here. And I'm, of course, the lawyer person. And then we have Russell plus Mill Studios that do the graphics. And the new code is filled with graphics. I really want to appreciate Stacy, Nathan, and Jim from the Community Development Department, who were, of course, very much part of our team. You know, we write this stuff, but we really need to ground truth it and sort of reality check it. This is what we've done elsewhere. Does this make any sense here? Or are we really crazy? And they've been pretty good about telling us when we work. So as we do the next, our scope was this. We revised and updated the current sign code you got. We importantly, the second bullet's really important, to obtain feedback from stakeholders. The stakeholders here include businesses and sign companies. We reached out to them and the staff, because those are the people that on the one hand want to put up signs, and on the other hand are charged with regulating them. And those stakeholders are huge in terms of wanting to make sure we put something together that isn't the very first day going to cause you problems. I will make another promise. On the very first day, there will be some element of the sign code that we did not anticipate, and it will need an amendment. And I'm sure that when I'm a city attorney wearing Matt's hat, when I tell the council, okay, we've really worked on this short-term rental ordinance and it's perfect now, it's gone through all this staff work and planning commission and outreach, and the very first application will illustrate some gap that you did not think of. Life is a process, not an event, and it is true with code. So don't be disappointed if there will be some sign that doesn't fit in neatly. We think we've captured it all, but this is a process, and you're never done. And I'm sure your staff tells you it's never done fixing the code. You just have to stick with it. But in any event, we did reach out to stakeholders. We interviewed them, and that really did affect. I'll point out a couple of places where it did affect what we ended up doing. Compliance with Supreme Court decisions. In 2015, Martin Landers and I were in the middle of rewriting I think it was the Brush sign code. And the Supreme Court, in a rare 9-0 decision, just handed down this Reed versus Gilbert, Arizona, small suburb of Phoenix case, that, without boring you too much about it, basically said if you have to read the sign, the content, the message on the sign to know how it's regulated, then you're really regulating speech. And you can't do that, which shocked everyone, because for decades we've been saying, okay, political signs are regulated this way, and you can have this many of them. Real estate signs are regulated well. You have to read the sign, right, to know it's a political sign or a real estate sign, and that had been fine for decades. And all of a sudden, in June of 2015, 2016, 2015, that was no longer okay, and we thought, well, the sky's falling, it will be impossible for us to regulate signs. And actually, in some way, I would say the Supreme Court really did us a favor, because it wasn't that hard. What we instead switched to was regulating signs by their type. What do they look like in terms of shape and size? And that's why I emphasized that very first slide. You didn't need to know what was on any of those signs, did you? To know it was a canopy sign or a marquee sign or a monument sign. That's great. And you know then how to regulate it. We have created categories and charts that regulate canopy signs and marquee signs and monument signs. And you don't have to read that. So it's read compliant, I guess is the best way of saying. Your code was pretty much along that road already, because a number of cities had updated their codes to address read. The other Supreme Court decision is the City of Austin case within, I think, the last year, because we always worried about off-premise signs. How in the world do you know if a sign is an off-premise sign advertising something that isn't offered on the premise without reading the darn sign? And so doesn't that violate read? And we came up with really creative, well, the sign has to be owned by the same party that owns the property, right, to kind of deal with that. But it was always awkward. And interestingly, the Supreme Court has given us a little room to say, because the City of Austin got away with saying, sign that off-premise sign that you can prohibit, which we do in this new code, advertising goods or services not available on the property. So dynamite, and we have included that. The last thing is incorporate best practices, and among others is the use of charts and graphics. So we can go to the next slide. Our schedule, there's 3 phases to this project, and we're in phase 3 actually now. We've done a code diagnosis where we go through and look at every single section of the code and make a report that is a diagnosis of what's good or bad or indifferent about the code. We then write the new code, that's the code update process, and then we take it through adoption. We've met already with the Planning Commission at study session. So the next events are Planning Commission hearing and City Council hearing. And so that's where we're at. We're at code adoption. I don't think the City Council meeting's been set yet. The Planning Commission, if I'm reading right, is October the 4th. And they'll make a recommendation to you. They had very few recommendations, but some when we met with them a few weeks ago. So we go to the next slide. Table of contents. This is how the sign code's now organized into 5 divisions. These terms don't tell you much unless I can tell you what they, what's really behind them. And here's how it's organized though. Under general provisions, you have the purpose and intent of the sign code. We really pump that up because it's important with the Supreme Court decisions that look very carefully at whether you're trying to regulate speech. And because you are to some extent, even if you use just time, place, and manner restrictions. For example, the number of yard signs you can have, and most people use yard signs for political campaigns. Isn't that a limitation on speech? Shouldn't it be unlimited? And cities have been able to find a middle ground there, but it's really important to have legislative declarations in your code that establish why it's legitimate for you to have these kinds of limitations. And we've done that in the first division. That's the division also addresses nonconformities and says, because one of the first calls Jim and his partner are going to get is, I've got a sign now, it's a pole sign. I see that that's now not allowed. And are you telling me I have to take it down? And Jim will be able to say no. In division 1 in this code says that if you've got an existing legal non-conforming sign, you're legal. You're not conforming, but you're legal until you want to move it or destroy it or change it, in which case you're going to have to morph that into a monument sign that's compliant. But for now, you're fine. Administration procedures, that's what tells you whether a permit's required for your sign type and whether there's an exemption from a permit. Not from the standards that I'll show you in a minute, but from the requirement of a permit. Good example, yard sign. I want to put up a yard sign supporting the non-closure of an elementary school, something that's near and dear to a lot of people's. Do I need a permit for that sign? The answer is no, I don't need a permit, but the size and location and number requirements in the code will apply, but I don't have to go in and get my ticket punched. And so the administration procedures will tell us that. General sign requirements that apply to everything, things like how you measure a sign, I'll show you a graphic in a minute, to determine whether it's within the size limitations, whether or not illumination is required. Classic, moving, oscillating type signs that make sounds and noises are prohibited, but that's a general sign standard. Permanent sign standards, all the standards for the types of signs that I showed you on that graphic. And then the same for temporary signs, all the standards for them, how high and how big, et cetera, they can be. I'll give you examples in a minute. So we can go to the next slide. Before I dig into the code itself, I did want to make one note about process. After we sort of did the diagnosis of the code, the existing code, we created an annotated outline of the new code. This is just one page as an example of it's a tool that we use to guide us before we actually start writing the new code. We go through the diagnosis process and an annotated outline so that when you're actually ready to start writing, you're not going back and forth and it's more organized. I've learned that as opposed to just starting to write right away, it's best. It's like they told you in college when you're writing a term paper, you should do an outline, right? Well, that's what we do for the code, and it's really served us well. And this is an example of that. We've said, okay, what's, for example, 8100, what's the purpose? And we've told ourselves, this is what we've got to do. Create statements for comprehensiveness and read the Supreme Court case compliance. The statements in the purpose that say we're doing this to address quality of life, et cetera. And at the same time, we're intending to, one of our purposes is to protect First Amendment rights, and that's built into this code. So this is an example of how we use the annotated outline to kind of guide our work. Slide. I promised to walk through at least one slide or two on each of the divisions. Here's the general sign requirements. And I said, that's how you measure and sort of operate the rest of the code. So here's two examples of the section 218300 on how you measure a sign. So the first one is how you measure the sign itself. And the second was how you measure individual logos and letters. And the graphic really helps because, of course, you've got signs that aren't always rectangles. And there's more detail in the sign measurement language that in the code that we've written that says, here's what you do with architectural features that kind of outline the sign. And because at some point, the whole wall kind of becomes a sign, right? And I'm thinking maybe auto parts. I'm not want to point out any particular company, but sometimes the effort is to get more signage, right? Let's say you're allowed 100 square feet of wall sign, which is a permanent sign type. But then, as it turns out, there's colors and graphics that really end up producing a sign that's 150 square feet in terms of how it's viewed by the public. And obviously, you have to kind of chart a careful course there because you want people to have interesting architectural elements on their building. And so you don't have blank cinder block, split face block walls. At the same time, you don't want those walls to turn into the sign itself, because then what's the point of having any kind of size limitations and reducing visual clutter? That other dynamic I talked about, you've got supporting the businesses on the one hand that normally and understandably want more sign and supporting quality of life on the other. How do you draw that line? And measuring the sign is key to that, to be able to know whether the sign is compliant or not with the dimensional requirements that I'll give you an example for in a minute. The next slide. So permanent sign types, you saw those on that graphic. Well, here's an example of a monument sign. This is what's going to replace pole signs. And there are monument signs throughout the city already. So it's not like it's a new concept or anything. People use them. It's under the freestanding sign type. And it says, the only freestanding type are monument signs. You'll notice that there's some requirements here, like number B, I think is important. The supporting structure has to be at least 2/3 of the dimension of the width and thickness of the sign. Otherwise, the supporting structure looks suspiciously like a pole, right? So, you have to say a monument sign really needs to be a monument sign that grows out of the ground as opposed to is planted on something small. I want to point out letter E in particular. Properties with frontage on either I-76 or 270, the allowable sign height and area, because this is the main advertising sign other than wall sign for businesses on those interstates, can be increased by an additional 25%. And this really grew out directly out of the stakeholder interviews that we had and the issues that those businesses have given the speed of traffic on those interstates and the ability for them to be seen. And that's the number we ended up with, and that's how come. But it's an example of how the stakeholder process affects a real important dimension, which is how big can the darn sign be? And how big does it need to be in the interstate traveling at, everyone's going the speed limit, right? And less speed.
How big of this is otherwise.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So here's an example of the charts that support these sign types. So for freestanding signs, we're thinking monument signs again. In the commercial and industrial districts, what are the standards? Well, you look down the standard down the left. Is it permitted? Yes, they're certainly permitted. On a 2-acre site, yes. On a 2 to 10 acre site, yes. On a larger than 10 acre site. All those yeses, you'd say, well, why do we even bother with that category? You have that category because later, in terms of size of the site, it'll affect the sign somewhat. So for example, maximum number, as you get larger in the site and you get to a site that's greater than 10 acres, then it's 1 per street frontage, maximum 2. And you'll notice the maximum area increases as well. Setback increases, illumination is allowed. It can be internally or externally lit. You know, this is really this is a commercial arena. And so you can expect that monument signs get to be illuminated, whether internally or externally. It's not going to be a rule where you can't illuminate signs. Now, the yard signs on my house, your house, don't get illuminated, and the charts will say that. So that's an example of a policy call that I think is a fair one that addresses the appropriate needs. Let's look at temporary signs. Next slide. Here's an example of how that would work. And here's a yard sign. That's a temporary sign. That's my sign advocating that the Homer Strand Elementary School should not be closed by the Jefferson County School District. That they're actually thinking of that. And there are signs out there that say that, save our local schools. Or it could be a political sign for a candidate or any other issue. And here's an example, was a graphic example, and what the requirements are. And let's turn to the next slide so you can see if I'm putting up these signs, because homeowners are going to really care about this chart, because this allows them to put signs on their property, as we in America believe we have God-given right to do. And I agree, and so does the Supreme Court. So we need to make sure that what we've got here matches up with what they're telling us. They're permitted. Is a permit required? No. They're permitted in residential areas and non-residential areas. A permit required? No, in either one of those. Maximum number? Unlimited within the maximum area requirements. And this is a place where cities get to make sort of subjective determination. We rewrote the sign code for the town of Fraser, and they allowed, I think, up to a slightly larger maximum square foot. And the rule was, look, have as many as you like, but your sign budget on your property is this many square feet. So we've got here 24 square feet total. And that was what came out of the engagement process and working with staff. So have as many as you like, but that's your budget to spend. So in this case, if it's 6 square feet per sign at 24 square feet, that's going to be 4 if my math is right. If you want more signs, then they're smaller, right? If you want, and that's kind of a dial that you can dial up and down. But we landed on numbers that admittedly are somewhat subjective. There's not a Supreme Court decision that says this is it. But what this does, and I spend a little time on it because this is where quite possibly there'd be complaints, because you will get someone that wants to advocate for all of the congressional candidates, a city council candidate, and an issue, and a Tabor question, right? All at the same November election. And we will get complaints that doesn't allow me to fully express my opinion on every single ballot issue. If there are 20 ballot issues, I get 20 signed. The law doesn't support that. It supports a reasonable number. You're going to have to make some choices. And other cities have allowed slightly more, others have allowed slightly less. But I'm pointing this out because it's an arena of friction no matter where you stick the number, right? And so if you say, well, it's completely unlimited, then you will get complaints. You will get complaints from the neighbor that says, my gosh, there's too many. Yes, sir.
In my experience, it hasn't been the political signs, but I'm sure that's definitely out there. What about home businesses? So there's been quite some fights about that, about is a sign legal and is it permanent, is it temporary? To me, what you're presenting to us sounds like those are perfectly fine as long as you don't go above your 24 square feet. Am I reading that correctly?
If it's a yard sign, if it's out in the yard, yes. If it's going to be on the wall of the house, then it becomes a commercial sign for that business. And there's wall sign.
So this may be for, for Matt. Can a HOA or Metro District supersede this law?
No, it's all going to be dictated by the sign code. So keep in mind that the work that Jerry's done has been, like he said, in cooperation with staff. So there's a lot of obviously policy decisions that are reflected in what's being presented too. based on staff and the stakeholder process that they all engaged in.
And the only reason you guys probably understand the reason we asked, but so say you're in an HOA controlled area and someone has
Tax business.
yeah. Tax. Wasn't trying to get that close to home, man. Tax business, candle business, whatever the case may be, and they want to put what some people think is a permanent sign and some people think is a non-permanent sign. To me, it looks like the law allows them to have that. I just want to make sure that we're being pretty clear about that before we move forward, because.
But I want to comment on that too, because I looked up our land development code on home-based businesses. And it doesn't allow signs for a home-based business in a neighborhood. So there may be a sign ordinance over here, but the home-based business says no signs. And it was the same kind of thing, is that somebody is actually putting an active business out of their home, like a light industry kind of business. And so the question was there a sign? Is all their equipment in the garage? But a sign in a neighborhood, that would take it to a new level.
And that's what I want to clarify, because I've been on that same side where I thought we weren't allowed to have business signs in a residential. And then there was the fight, it's only temporary, or this guy mowed or blew out my sprinklers and gave me a deal for, putting his business sign in my yard for 3 weeks. And then there's been arguments about that's promoting a business in a residential, and it's like, yeah, but so is like everything else you put it, like having a Ford parked in front of my house might be promoting Ford. Like, at what point are we, drawing the line? So I'm just hoping for clarification is all I'm saying.
I think that's what this whole entire process is designed to address.
Yeah.
So
I just happen to be the HOA Metro District President as well, and I'll get absolutely crushed by this here soon, so.
blame City Council. So, I think that is exactly what we're trying to address. And I don't know, to subtly say this, I mean, it's been on the radar since, if you look at what's in the sign code and you look at Reed v. Gilbert, this is overdue. That being said, I want to give the floor back to Jerry to kind of elaborate on some of those particular signs, because it's all addressed here, and you have the whole document in the packet, I believe. So you can look at those particular issues. But we're also, I think we and staff are trying to anticipate some of those issues and give guidance where previously it may not have been, or where that guidance may not have necessarily been enforceable.
I read most of the packet. Some of it's just make sure it's been discussed on.
There's a lot of pages. I'm impressed by that.
I didn't read it all.
Okay.
I'm good at going over sections.
A good example of one of the things you mentioned, that somebody does tree trimming, or they fix your plumbing, or they do your roof. That's a classic. You do your roof and they really want that sign. I mean, no different than a real estate sign, when you think about it. And if you want to use some of your permitted yard sign budget for that, you are allowed to. And we do not put a time frame on that. Years ago, I remember when I was first hired as a Weaver City Attorney, it was 1995, sadly enough, so you can all do the math now. But they had political signs, they have to be this size to begin with, okay. And then they can only be up X days before the election, they have to be removed Y days, after the election. And even before Reed versus Gilbert, I thought, and they had to also say who who had paid for the sign on the bottom. And I thought, okay. And because who's going to enforce, even before Reed versus Gilbert, who's going to enforce, okay, it's now 15 days after the election, you have to take that sign down. And we all know we're irritated by signs staying up after the election. But Reed versus Gilbert kind of wiped all that out, and we made the change. So the point I'm taking too long to make is that we now categorize those signs along with the real estate signs, along with the roofer signs. If you want to use your sign budget for that and that's gonna be out in your yard all year, okay. And that is, I think, a compromise we have to make in part because of Reed versus Gilbert. But we've made that compromise and we've made it with this subjective line number, this max area line. Because that's where the action really is in terms of what's going to happen in the yard. And you will get complaints on both sides of that line. And I guarantee it. And you're welcome to blame me at that point. And you say, you know,
Yeah, the business card.
that's, it could go either way, but the consultant has given us what they believe is a reasonable middle ground between the competing forces here. So there's that.
But you could do shade signs. You could do 4 6-foot signs in your front yard telling the story
Yes,
of
exactly.
your business, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
but
Do you
if,
like the?
if currently the law around freedom of speech, for example, allows political phone calls to come through, but doesn't allow commercial phone calls to come through if you are on a no-call list, I don't understand why the same legal argument can't apply to yard signs, that you can have political yard signs on a temporary basis, but not the other kind of signs
And you make a good
in a
point.
neighborhood.
Yeah, you make a good point. And it is available that the case law says you can limit commercial signs more stringently than free expression signs. And I'll tell you that for most of this code, that's really what the code's doing, isn't it? It's regulating commercial signs and commercial industrial districts and how big and all that. This is an example, and you put your finger right on it, of one of the few regulations here that applies to both commercial and non-commercial speech equally. You're right, the Supreme Court has said there's more room for regulation of commercial signs. And I'll tell you that the decision made here is that on the yard sign, in the yard sign arena, it's not worth making that distinction. You could, but that would really complicate, in my opinion, the administration of what are amount to small signs that are on people's yards. So you'd have the political signs that are less limited, and then you've got the real estate signs, the roofer signs, et cetera, that you're capable of regulating more heavily. And no one's doing that. I'm not saying that you can't, but at some point you've got to allow the staff that's got to administer this some room to be able to not have to drive by and say, okay, that's a real estate sign and here's the rules, and that's a campaign sign and here are the rules, because it becomes impossible. And that's a level of detail and regulatory effort that we're recommending is not worth it. And few, if any, cities that I know of are going there on the house yard sign arena. You could, but that tremendously expands the enforcement activity that you're gonna have to put into regulating those signs. That's my answer.
Not if you're overruling quality community, then that trumps it. So if you would have a time limit on any yard sign, I guess, in a way, temporary, or categories. I mean, we have categories. Our land use code doesn't say one thing, it says there's a billion things because there's so many categories. So to use a broad swath for something that affects residential areas, that affects how an HOA is run, what decisions they have made within their community, I think is not the right direction, in my opinion.
Well, let me unpack that a little bit because there's 2 or 3 things in the question you used. One is time frames. Yes, right now you see unlimited and you see maximum area and no distinction between commercial and any other kind of sign. We've talked about the commercial versus any other kind, and I respect your opinion, asking you to respect mine. And in the end, you guys are the policymakers and I'm not. I don't get to vote on it, you're gonna. So that's in your ballpark. On the subject of time, First Amendment has always said you can regulate speech in terms of time, place, and manner, just not content. So yes, we could have a time frame here. And that would mean somebody's got to keep track of that. And let me run some numbers. If there are, how many single family homes in the city now? Would you say 20,000? 20,000, okay. Everybody's got one sign and it's a political sign, which you can limit in terms of time. And we could say, all right, political signs can be up for 30 days a year. And you pick when. Most people pick 30 days for the election, but you pick when. And the 31st day, then in order to really enforce that, somebody's going to have to go out and issue some kind of warning or letter or ticket to not 20,000 people. Obviously, some people take it out, but some people won't. And that's the kind of effort that costs real live money. And it's a policy call for you. If you want to put the money into that, we can say these signs have a time limit on them, but there will be a budget impact to that is then not going to be used to tell a commercial business your sign is too large, it's got lights on it, you have to take those off. It's a time-intensive effort. Those are my thoughts. I get it that you guys are the policymakers, and I can't convince you necessarily, and I respect that you've heard my opinion. I'm going to go on, if it's all right, but you've identified an issue that is a policy call for you within certain constraints, and it can be changed, but it's going to have to be the council as a whole that says this is what we want to change. And I know exactly where you change it. You change it here, and you remind me never to touch, don't touch that again. You change it here, and you change, you probably have another category for commercial versus all others or something like that. I mean, that's how you actually make the change. Well, let me go to the next slide. Definitions, because we're almost done. Definitions are, the way your definitions are set up, you've got a single, rather large section in your land use code for definitions, and you don't have definitions that are associated with individual titles or chapters, and that's fine. There are things that set it up that way. So the materials you got from us are the whole new sign code, and then the definitions. And the definitions, though, are, they're about that thick, and only a small fraction of them relate to signs. And you just have to find them in alpha order. And we pulled out here the signs in alpha order that are some of the sign code signs. Next time I present this, I might come in front of you and make sure I have the definition for off-premise signs, because those are not permitted under the code as revised, and I'll show you that definition. The sign that advertises goods or services not available on the subject property. And you actually have to read that sign, don't you, to know that it's an off-premise sign, but happily the Supreme Court in the Austin case has allowed us to do that. So that's the definitions. Let's see what's next. Next steps. Well, refinements out of this meeting, out of the Planning Commission's public hearing on October the 4th. Any direction we get, we'll incorporate. Then it'll come in front of you. We haven't set the council public hearing date yet, but when that's set, you'll see me again. And I'll be the one presenting again here, or actually out there when you adopt it. So that's all I've got. I'm happy to take any questions. So yes, ma'am.
I'm really curious. What was the case that drove it all the way to the Supreme Court?
I can tell you what the Reed case was, and I'm struggling. Maybe Matt can help me remember what the Austin. Well, it's the city of Austin. They had an off-premise sign prohibition that said can't. The signs aren't allowed to advertise goods or services not available. In the Reed case, that was Mr. Reed was the pastor of a church, and the church in Gilbert, Arizona. It's a sort of a large suburb actually on the east side of the Phoenix metropolitan area. And they had itinerant, it was kind of an itinerant church. They met temporarily in different locations each Sunday. And so they would put out these little temporary signs. It's like, homes for sale in the 300s. There aren't any more, though, are there, in the 300s? That's funny, it's my only joke. Okay, never mind. Homes for sale in the 500s down the block. You know, you see those, right? They kind of pop up in the right of way, which aren't allowed anyhow. As you know, can't put stuff in the signs in the right of way, and that's another whole topic. But they would put these signs out saying, the XYZ church, I forget the name of the church, services this week at, you know, Vitamin Cottage, or this week at the elementary school, or this week, you know, we're borrowing room in the Baptist church, or whatever they were doing. And the city had, beyond just the establishment of those in the rights of way, they were on actually private property as well. And the city had a regulation that said no temporary signs advertising religious services. And they actually had a category, I think, for religious signs. And the church took that one up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, city, you've got the right to regulate signs. You can regulate them in the right of way, and you can regulate them on private property. That's what sign codes do. But what you can't do is decide upon your regulation based upon reading the sign. And we have to read this sign. There were some concurring opinions in that Supreme Court case for those of us that watch the Supreme Court, which is an acquired taste, I think, like other things. But the while it was a 9-0 opinion written by Justice Thomas, of all people, there were a lot of concurring opinions with some of the justices saying, well, this is really gonna, how's this gonna work when we, you know, when in practice, when we when we in the past have been regulating the signs on the basis of what they said, and isn't this going to cause real problems? And so, but all the concurring opinions concurred, so it became the law of the land. And as I said earlier, for the first 6 months, we were just sure that the sky had really fallen and that we had no way to regulate signs. And then it dawned on all of us that do this work that, well, you know, if this is a monument sign, this is a pole sign, we don't need to know what's on them to be able to regulate it. But it was, I think in part, I think the fact that it was a sort of a pure free speech plaintiff, as opposed, frankly, as you point out, to a commercial plaintiff that really allowed the court to have as much unanimity as it did. But that's a much longer answer, sorry, your question than you were expecting. Other questions? Anything that occurs to you, please make sure staff hears that, and they will get Jim or Stacy or Nathan can route any additional concerns you have to us, and we'll plug them into the into the hopper and make sure that it's addressed either in our materials, the code itself, or in the cover memos. Yes, ma'am.
What are the rules included for existing signs? Like if an existing sign falls over, does it now have to be under the new sign code?
Excellent question. For an existing sign, that becomes, it's legal now, like so many other legal non-conforming uses, as you well know. When you change the rules of the game, you know, people that have something that was legal before you change the rules, it's legal after, it's just non-conforming. If they want to change it or it's destroyed, then they have to comply. And that rule is true here. I'm trying to remember exactly how we've described the legal non-conformity. Just a sec, I think I can find that. I'm smart enough to find it in a hurry. Non-conforming signs. Let's see. Signs that are legally established prior to the adoption of this article, but no longer comply, are permitted to retain subject requirements of 215510. Let me go to that, because I think that's the one, you know, the usual rule you often have on other subjects like non-conforming structures if they're damaged to the tune of 50% or something. That's a common rule. Let me see what the rule here is that we came up with. What did I say? 5510. 5510. Thank you. gonna jump out in any minute now. 55, 10, 5.
If it's easier to get back to us.
Yeah, it would. Thank you.
No problem. I don't expect you to go through all those,
Thank you.
probably hundreds of pages.
It's a fair amount of material.
Alrighty.
Absolutely fair question. In fact, it's one that I often get when you're changing the rules of the game on people. Understandably, they're concerned about that and they want to know where am I safe and where am I not? And I'll make sure that makes its way into the cover materials.
But on the other hand, you also want to be able to move to the new sign code
Absolutely.
with old people at
Absolutely.
some point. So
Yeah.
where do you get to do that?
Yep. Drawing that line is another one of those compromises, but it's one I'm really familiar with and I understand why you need it. Well, thanks very much for your time and I have a long night yet ahead of you and I appreciate your time and attention. Look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you. Time to take your presentation. We're gonna move on to the franchise agreement overview. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. As you all know, the city currently has a franchise agreement that expires December 2023 with Comcast. We thought it was necessary to have a conversation with you all about the relationship that we as a city have with Comcast under that agreement. Some general background as to what's covered within that agreement, and ultimately get direction from you all. Once we enter a negotiation for a renewal, you will all would like to see that provides a benefit to our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Borgeri with our consultant team to kind of walk you through it.
Thank you. With that, I will turn it over to our consultant team. Walk you through the memo that you all received this morning from them.
Good job, John.
Good job.
Mayor, council members and staff, it's nice to be here with you this evening. My name is Ken Fellman. I'm here with my colleague Colleen McCroskey. And thanks for having me here on the sign code night. I've known Jerry Dahl for well over 30 years and I learn something every time I hear him speak. So thanks for sharing him with me tonight. Our firm, similar to Jerry's, we work almost exclusively with local governments. In addition to general local government law, we also serve in some places as town attorneys or city attorneys or county attorneys, special district attorneys. We specialize in telecommunications and utility issues. So sometimes that's zoning issues for towers. The same way you're writing a new sign code, we work with cities to rewrite zoning codes dealing with how you deal with whether it's the towers or the small cells, even though they're not really small in your rights of way, and those kinds of issues. But we also do a lot of work with cable television. Cable franchising has been a requirement that cities have imposed upon cable companies going back to the beginning of cable, and is currently governed by a number of federal statutes. So over the years, the federal laws have changed and that has impacted what we can do and what we, more importantly, what we can't do in cable franchise regulation. So a couple of other just initial points. I have two goals tonight. I'm going to briefly go through the memo that you've received, and really my point is just to emphasize a couple of key issues there, and then do our best to answer any questions you may have, because this is it's not always easy stuff and it can get kind of esoteric. And then second, your staff team that will be negotiating this franchise is seeking your direction. So if you have any tonight, and it may be just come back in a few months after you've sat down with Comcast and tell us how it's going. But if there's anything in particular that you feel is really important that you want us to be focusing on, we want to hear from you about that. It may be an issue that I say, well, we really can't do that under federal law. We still want to hear from you and have that discussion. And then one last preliminary issue. At some point in this negotiation, there is a possibility that Comcast may reach out to you individually. They may have already done that this summer at the Municipal League Conference, which is one place they tend to try to do that a lot if city council members and mayors are there. You certainly can speak with them. Staff is not going to tell you don't speak with these guys. But one thing we would ask you is to remind them that the negotiations themselves are handled by the city's negotiating team. They're not negotiated by individual council members, that the team is going to be coming to council periodically to update you and to seek your feedback if we have any particularly difficult issues. Because sometimes they do like to play the divide and conquer game. And the last thing that I like hearing at the negotiating table is, well, we talked to council member X last week and we understand that the council wants to do this. And that's the exact opposite of what we were planning on talking about. So just be aware of that. They may reach out to you. If you don't want to talk to them, you should feel comfortable saying, I don't feel comfortable talking about this. So we'll come to council at the appropriate time. But if you do, that's fine. Just let us know. All right. So we have a franchise agreement that expires at the end of 2023. So we've got plenty of time to negotiate it. Usually, if there are not significantly complicated issues, this is something we can get done in about 6 months. Sometimes it's hard to get the right people to the table at the right time, and things tend to drag out, and what you thought was going to take a few months ends up taking twice that long. And if you do run into a difficult issue, where Comcast will say, we can't deal with that at the local level, we have to go back to our corporate office in Philadelphia, that can extend it as well. So the city is in exactly the right place now, timing wise, for when to get started. What a cable franchise is at its core is a contract authorizing the cable company to use the streets for a cable system. Now, when cable started in the 70s, there was one kind of wire that they used, and it provided one service, video service, packages of video programming. Over the years, as you know, you can get multiple services. You can get internet service from your cable provider. You can get voice service, including 911, from your cable provider, and you can get the traditional video packages. Now we have streaming services as well. Under federal law and state law, the city only has the legal authority to require franchise consideration for the cable, the video piece of this. So if you think that traditionally Comcast provides video, internet, and phone, they usually don't bill that separately. If you're a subscriber, you get a bundled price for whatever your package is of how many channels, for whatever speeds you're getting on the internet, and if you have phone service, or you might not have phone service, you get a bundle of these two. And it might be faster internet and fewer channels, or more channels and slower internet. They have so many different bundles, it's crazy. What they have to do when they pay the city a franchise fee, which is the rent that they pay for the use of the rights of way, they have to allocate out from that bundle what piece of it is from the cable, the video revenues. And if the city wants to, the city can audit their finances and determine whether they're doing that fairly in accordance with accepted accounting principles, and determine if the city is getting the right amount of money. But the point is, we don't get franchise fees from the internet revenues. We don't get franchise fees from telephone revenues, only from the video revenues. And it's not 100% clear, and it will be in the next 10 years, but that's why I have Colleen here, because she's a lot younger than me. So she may be the one who comes back and tells you about it 5 or 6 or 7 years from now, as to where do streaming services fit in? Are those traditional cable, or is that more of an internet-based service where we can't regulate it? So this is evolving, it's changing. Now, what the federal law allows is we can get up to 5% of the cable video gross revenues for franchise fees. So if we simplify the math, if you have a $100 bill, most people have, it's way more than 100, but in my simple math mind, I like to use that number. And if 1/3 you get voice, video, and data, the video, if we say it's a third of that, so now we're $33.33 is to the video, we get 5% of that. Your cable franchise revenues for the city finance director here by chance tonight? No. Right.
She's online.
Okay, all right, she's online. She would probably confirm. Now I'm setting myself up now in case I'm wrong, right?
For her.
She would probably confirm that Our cable franchise revenues are going down a little bit. You've heard of people cutting the cord, right? They don't subscribe to traditional cable anymore. They get an internet connection, they get Hulu and Netflix and Disney Plus and whatever else they get. But it's not going down as fast as the number of cable subscribers. They are losing cable subscribers faster than their cable revenues because they keep raising the price of the bundled package, right? That's not a sustainable model. And it leads a number of experts in the field. I tend to agree with this, but some of the economic experts to think that we may not have cable as we know it in the next 10 years. So for some of you, and maybe for all of you, this is the first cable franchise you will have had to vote on. It's probably, if any of you are serving 10 years from now, it may be the last one, because I don't know that we're going to be in a position to regulate, because I don't think traditional cable service will be here 10 years from now. Be that as it may, until it goes away, the city has a role to play here. One of the key things, I'm just going to go through some of the key issues. I mentioned gross revenues. We want to, gross revenue, if you look at every cable franchise in the country, it's defined either really broadly or really narrowly and everything in between. So it's the amount that a subscriber pays for the cable part of their bundle. It's advertising revenues that they make from the advertising on the cable system. It's equipment fees, like the devices that you rent and the cable box that you rent. It's disconnect fees, connection fees. All of those things you can put into the definition. Many communities don't do that. Our practice, and we have worked with experts in cable accounting, has been to try to define that as broad as possible. We don't get a lot of money for franchise fees, but we get 5% of a pie called gross revenues. And the way we define that pie will determine whether that 5% slice is bigger or smaller. So we have a pretty good definition of gross revenues in the city's current franchise, which I was involved in negotiating 10 or so years ago. And the one thing that we want to change this time around is the kind of records that we require Comcast to keep if we do want to audit and make sure they pay. And here's why. I mentioned the bundles of packages that they have. Every now and then they change how they internally do those allocations. They have a specific way in that $100 package. We allocate this 33% to video, 33%, but they change though from time to time. They'll change in this kind of package. Now we allocate more or less to the video and more or less to the internet. They're required by the franchise agreement to keep their current records for each franchise period for 3 years, but how they do those internal allocations, some cities have found out when they have done audits that once they change how they allocate, they don't keep the old records, or they say they don't have the old records. So you go back to do an audit, and you want to look at how much have we gotten for the last 3 years? Are we getting the right amount of money? And they say, well, we changed the way we did the allocations 18 months ago. So we have the records for how we're doing them now, but we don't have those earlier records. So our expert who's doing the examination can't do the records. That lesson, painful to one city who learned it, has now caused many of our other municipal clients to have better record keeping requirements in the franchise so that we can do our due diligence if you ever decide that it's necessary to audit how much money the city is getting. There were a number of FCC rule changes during the last administration in Washington, D.C. Suffice it to say that municipal governments did not do very well with the last administration in Washington, D.C. And the FCC that was in charge at that time passed a number of rules that made it tougher for local governments to do our jobs and to generate reasonable compensation for the use of the rights of way. One of the things they did, the Cable Act, the federal cable law that governs most of this, was adopted in 1984. And for years, similar to what Jerry said about the sign code, for years and years and years, everybody interpreted franchise fees as being financial only. We get 5% of their cable gross revenues. There were other things that cities got in cable franchises: free service in public buildings. So free service to City Hall, free service to firehouses, free service if you got a public works building and you want to have service out there. Some communities had high-speed connections for an internal city network through their cable company. The FCC changed how 36 years of interpretation of the Cable Act and said any of those in-kind benefits count against the 5% franchise fee cap. So cable companies like Comcast would be in a position now to say, you're getting 5% of our gross revenues and you're getting free service in public buildings. Either we're going to start deducting from your franchise fees the value of that free cable service, or you can start paying for that service. And the FCC said they could charge the retail value of that, which was ridiculous. That case went to court. The court upheld most of the FCC rules, but the court said, no, it's not the retail value that you charge the cities. It's what does it actually cost the cable company to provide that service. And just as an, oh, by the way, the cost of providing free cable service in this building is minuscule. It's nowhere near the retail price that they charge. So Comcast has not yet gone to cities and said, we're going to stop the free service that we do in the community, but they might, and we have to be prepared for it. So we have language we will have language in a new franchise that says if Comcast wants to make a change, they can't do it unilaterally. They have to come to us, they have to tell us what they want to do, what the legal basis is for why they want to do it. We'll see if we agree with them or disagree with them. And if we need to make an amendment to the cable franchise agreement, we'll do that. But basically, we're going to have some new language to incorporate these new federal rules and to do it in a way where they can't unilaterally change things. They have to come to the city first, and we have to try to work it out. And if we can't work it out, they have the right to bring a legal action, and we'll have a right to bring a legal action. So incorporating language to address with new federal rules is important. PEG channels. I know that you have a Channel 8 in Commerce City. Some communities have very, very active Channel 8 programming. Some just put their city council meetings on. Some have no Channel 8 programming. To the extent that access programming is important to you and to your community, we can require the continuation of those channels going forward in the city, and we will address that in the next cable franchise. How many channels we get will depend upon how active you want to be in the kind of programming that you do. Again, if you're just doing council meetings and planning commission meetings and maybe liquor board meetings, you probably only need one channel, but there are communities that do news programs and high school football and a whole bunch of other stuff, or they have partnership IGA agreements sometimes where they get a channel for the school district. And some of the Adams County districts years ago did a bunch of access programming on cable channels. I'm not sure how active they are anymore, but that's another issue that we will address of great importance. And then just the last couple that we had in the memo, the right of way use, kind of the public works part of this, they're required to follow local codes. We don't have to negotiate with them and come up with contractual language that says, here's how you have to operate in the street. We have a code. Everybody else, whether they get a franchise or not, CenturyLink doesn't provide cable service. They don't have to get a franchise. Zayo, another big fiber company, they want to run fiber in the streets. The state law gives them a right to be there, but we have local codes that they have to abide by. Comcast has to abide by those codes too. So we have language that we can put in the franchise agreement that kind of tells them what to do if we think our codes aren't quite as beefed up as we'd like them to be. But part of this process of negotiating a cable franchise is to work not just with Jason, but with your public works department, and to look at your existing streets code, look at the kind of language we put in franchise agreements, and then say, does this work in Commerce City? Do we have anything in the franchise draft that is actually in conflict with the code? In which case we want to fix that. Is there anything that we don't have in our code that we'd like to see in the franchise? So we'll need some input from public works and traffic engineers on that. Insurance is standard. We have standard language, and now that the state has changed governmental immunity to where the limit goes up every couple of years, we have language that we've started putting to put in franchise agreements to track that, so that they have to have at least the minimum amounts of coverage from the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. But we've had standard coverages for, and we'll want to work with the city's risk manager where they have, I think the levels of $1 million general commercial liability per occurrence and 3 million aggregate. That hasn't changed in over 10 years. Right? Costs have changed in the last 10 years. I don't think those numbers have changed in 20 years, actually. And I know that Comcast carries a lot more insurance than that. So we will come up with some insurance coverages that are consistent with city policies and appropriate for today's market. And then the last thing about defaults and remedies, we used to have provisions in franchise agreements that provided for liquidated damages. It said, if there's a violation, the city thinks there's a violation, you tell Comcast to try to work it out. You can't work it out, then we give them notice. And then we have a meeting with the city manager's office. And that has to happen within a certain period of time. And then if that doesn't work, we can escalate it. We can have a hearing in front of the city council. And if you find they're in default, then we can impose these liquidated damages of $500 a day for this kind of penalty, or this kind of violation, $1,000 a day for this kind of violation, 150, those kind of things. Over the years, cable companies, not just Comcast, have tried to get away from that. And I don't mind them getting away from it. If they want to insist that we don't want to pay those kind of things, my position legally as your outside legal counsel and my advice to Matt is, well, then we're not going to take 6 months to have all these meetings and then come to a hearing in front of city council to decide if they're in violation. And then you decide if they're in violation. We're like, well, okay, now what do? We have to sue them. If they don't want to go through this process and then have to pay at the end if they're in violation, then the alternative to that is if we think you're in violation, we'll try to work it out with you. If we don't work it out with you and we want to take it to court, we'll take it to court. And we're not going to waste 6 months playing around with a bunch of hearings and sort of practicing for the court case before we get there. So it's unclear exactly how Comcast is going to react to that issue. And I don't have a strong feeling that one is better than the other, but I do have a strong feeling that you don't go through this long bureaucratic process if there's not some kind of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. If they don't want to do that, then we say, we'll do our best to work something out with you. If we don't work it out with you, we reserve all legal rights that we have to take whatever action we deem appropriate. So with that, I will see if you have any questions and see if you have any direction and anything we can help you with, we will try to do it.
What is our current percentage in our contract with
5%.
5%?
5% is the maximum amount that federal law allows. I know of a handful of jurisdictions throughout the state that do less, but almost everyone is at 5%.
And if you make any adjustments that have dollars tied to them, do they go against the 5% or are they added to the 5%? Do they come away from something else? Is a 5% the max overall?
5% of the amount of cable gross revenues is the max. And based on that new FCC rule that the court just upheld about a year ago, what that means is if we were to extract something, negotiate some other benefit, right? We want to have fiber connecting the Civic Center and we have remote police stations in parts of the city or substation or public works building. We want to have them do our fiber connectivity, and we want you to give that to us as part of the benefits of the cable franchise. Their response would be, and they would be right about this under the new rules, we're going to tell you how much it costs to do that, and we're going to deduct that amount from the 5% that you otherwise would have received based upon what our subscribers are paying gross revenues.
That's what I was thinking. Okay. Yeah, the funny thing is that 30 years ago, I was the chair of a franchise fee review task force of volunteers in a community. So just like REDAC, that was volunteers coming up using their expertise. We read the law and we came forward to the city council with all kinds of things they needed to include in their new contract. The law has changed tremendously since then. There's been lots of legal changes too. So I know it's nothing the same, but I know how technical it is. Let's put it that way. Thank you very much.
Can you tell them how much annually?
I can't. I'll tell you, Jason, do you know?
I don't have that number off the top of
We-
my
Oh,
head. but-
it's not because you can't, because the FCC.
Oh, no, right, yes, yes, we can, just not tonight.
No, yeah. Right.
We'll get that information.
Okay, great. And what if the community wanted to have like the high school sports put on TV? How does that work?
Yeah, Matt?
I was gonna try to differentiate between the fact that the school is a separate entity and the school district is a separate entity in the city
Okay.
as the first note.
All right.
So
So in your hypothetical, let's suppose the school district came to the city, right? Because the city is the only entity that legally can say to Comcast, we need a channel, or we need two channels. So let's say the school district came to the city and said, we have a plan, we want to put high school sports on an educational access channel that can be shown on a cable system. And maybe they say, and we're going big. We're not just gonna do sports, we're gonna do choir concerts, we're gonna do the school musical at the end of the year, we're gonna do graduation, homecoming, whatever. At that point, you look at how much programming that you're doing for the government programming, and you say, do we have enough time available on that channel to accommodate the school district? If you don't, in our negotiations, we would say to Comcast, we need an additional channel. And the reason is because the school district is committed to doing this now. Comcast doesn't like to give channels, but think of channels as bandwidth on their network, right? And without distinguishing between video and internet, right? If they give that bandwidth to us, basically for no cost, that's bandwidth they could monetize some other way. So we really would have to make a case. I would ask the school district, show me what kind of budget you have for this, show me what kind of staff you've hired or consultant or contractors that you've hired to do these games. What equipment do you have now? Can you really pull this off? Or are you gonna come back to the city and ask us to fund it? Because, oh, by the way, we don't have the money to buy you cameras and microphones and lights and all that kind of stuff. But if they were really serious, if a community really wanted to do it, and in Denver, they have a nonprofit group that does public access programming. The public access actually does some really cool stuff. It's not just Wayne's World, right? In some communities, they have some very interesting programming, and that nonprofit raises a certain amount of money and they run their operations. And when Denver got their last franchise, they got a channel that they said, we're going to be able to put your public access programming on this channel. So if we had a government or nonprofit partner that came to the city and said, help us get a channel, we have programming we want to use, I would want to make sure they were serious. And if they were serious, I would say to Jason and Matt and John, let's see what we can get for them and try to help them out.
And how much programming does the city use at this point? Is it just city council meetings or?
Been more likely, it's been mostly our public hearings that we have, public hearing meetings, so it's been city council. I will say this, we do have a high def and a standard def channel, but we actually already do have an existing agreement with one school district, Adams 14, for a standard def. Primary use between those three has been intermittent, but we've been more focused on our public meetings. And also, when we're not having our public meetings, we've also then posted information about upcoming neighborhood meetings and other things that are happening within the city.
One last question, how long does the contract last?
Well, it's negotiable as to how long it lasts. Usually, I would say over the last 10 to 15 years, most franchises have been for 10 years. 15 is a little bit too long, 10. If you get shorter than 10, it's, within a few years, you're starting up the process again. And as much fun as we have doing it, it's less fun for Matt and Jason.
Thank you.
I was just gonna add there, Adams 14 does have a contract already and it's channel 22.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things, and because that was raised as a specific example, one of the things we'll do as we prepare for negotiations is we will reach out to them at some point. I think, Jason, we talked about this when we got together the first time and find out what are your plans in Adams 14. Do you want to keep that channel? Do you want to get a high definition channel since most people are only watching high definition these days? 10 years ago, that was not the case, but today it is. And we'll see what their needs are, and to the extent we can help them, we'll try.
Thank you for answering all my questions. I appreciate that.
How many channels so that channel with Adams 14 had to be negotiated through Commerce City because we have the contract. How many channels do we have?
We as a city have two, a high
We have
def and a
two.
standard def.
Right. Well, we negotiated in the franchise for 3.
Right.
Right, so one is for the city for standard definition and high definition. And then the third one, we have an agreement with Adams 14. is it?
Adams 14.
Adams 14, that we get the channel for them, but they do the programming, they pay for the equipment, I believe.
So why do we have a standard and a high def? Two
Great
separate-
question, great
separate
question.
channels.
So, not everyone in this room is as old as me and remembers the conversion from black and white to color TVs. But for anyone who is, you will remember that we didn't all just have color TVs when they started coming out. And my grandmother had a black and white TV long after we didn't have any more black and white TVs. So it's similar in the conversion. When high def first came out, those TVs were very expensive. Not all of our friends and neighbors had them. And we were still watching channel 2 and channel 4 and channel 7 and 9 and 31. Now, if you have a high definition TV and you type in channel 7, it sends you to channel 652. But to the extent that you have members of your community that are not watching in high definition, they can only watch their city council meetings if we show it in standard. So basically the city has one standard channel and one high definition channel. Same programming goes on both. If you have a high def TV, you can watch city council in high def. They can see you all in high definition. If you don't have a high definition, you only watch it on the standard definition channel. So, we worked with another community are working with another community that looked at their demographics and then asked Comcast tells the city how many subscribers they have that subscribe to this package versus that package. And the basic package, the most inexpensive package, has no high definition. And that particular community looked at how many people in that city only have the lowest tier. And they said, that's enough people that we don't want to cut them out from being able to see city council meetings. For those people, we will continue to have a standard definition. So even though most people watch in high def, those are the people who are probably our lowest income demographic. And
I'd be more likely to cut out the high def because who needs to see us fancy? I mean, we're not a fancy production operation by any stretch.
Yeah. The problem is a lot of people, I mean, if you think about it, in the channel 8 was a great location. When Comcast decided they were going to put all of Metro Denver government channels on channel 8, half the people who end up watching, I'm a former mayor and city council member from Arvada. And, back in the 90s and early 2000s, when people were starting to watch this, half the time they got to council because they're scrolling through, right? Channel 2, channel 4, channel 7, oh, channel 8. Oh, I know that person. And then they watch the council meeting. When I think now the high definition channel is channel 880. So if you're looking at the Denver broadcast channels at 652, 653, 654, you're not going to scroll through those unless you stay with your clicker for a long time before you get to the Commerce City Council meeting. So there needs to be other ways to promote what we're doing. And the people, though, who still only have a smaller number of channels and get it all in standard definition, so they are watching channel 4 and channel 7 and channel 9. They're scrolling through, they will find you on channel 8 on the cable system, and they'll still have that benefit of.
If you have a high definition TV, do you also have channel 8?
Well, you do. I know on my television, if I hit channel 4 or channel 7, it'll say, this is also in high definition on 654. Do you want to go there? and you tend to say, oh yeah, yes. And so then you won't, if you go 654, you don't get to 658 and you'll see the government channel.
We don't have cable.
Let me go back to a statement you made regarding this fee. It's only capable of being charged by federal law on the actual video or what we refer to as cable channels for that video service. I'm looking at my Xfinity bill and I see $100. I see $100.
He does not represent you individually.
Bear with me. Because I'm sure I'm not the only one.
I'll pull mine up right now.
But I see $100 is my internet and $10 is my voice. And at the very bottom of the bill, I have a municipal charge of 50 cents, which is that 5%. So it appears to me, looking at this.
The municipal charge is not the 50.
What is the municipal
So
charge?
you don't get video from Comcast,
I
you
don't.
just get internet and voice. Would it be okay if I looked at that?
Trust me.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So are they charging the franchise fee on me for my voice? And I only ask because if they're doing it to me, I can only imagine they're doing it to everybody else out there.
And then
Well-
where is that money going?
Yeah, I would guess that that's not a franchise fee. I have no, I mean, look, the CCUA group that I mentioned in my memo, which Commerce City is a part of, has questioned Comcast on a number of their billing practices on cable because they're confusing and they're arguably not the fairest way to charge people and not transparent. And it's things like that. Matt, Jason, it literally says municipal fee, no tax, no this. I mean, sometimes they'll put, 911 fee. Okay, well, I know what that is, right? FCC regulatory fee. I can tell what that is. I have no idea what a municipal fee of 50 cents would be. Yeah, it's just what it theoretically could be, but if they're doing this, it's a mistake. So really what has to happen based on, now we have a question. And tomorrow, one of us, and we'll coordinate here who that is, probably somebody from your staff, will be contacting our Comcast friends and saying, well, what exactly is that? In addition to the franchise fee, the one other financial thing we can charge in a cable franchise is called a PEG fee. PEG is the acronym for Public Education and Government Channel. So the Channel 8, Channel 22, you're only allowed to charge that on cable. And you're only allowed to charge that for, or the city's only allowed to use that money for capital expenditures related to your government channel operations. So we can buy cameras with it, we can buy software, we can buy computers. You can't put that money in the general fund like you can the franchise fee. But that amount happens to be 50 cents per subscriber per month. If they are charging subscribers who don't get cable a PEG fee. Now on my Comcast bill, it says PEG fee. So I'm thinking it's just a coincidence that it happens to be 50 cents, but I am now as curious as you are, Mayor. And when Jason and John figure this out, I'll be as curious as you are to find out what the answer is.
Can you also enlighten us on what a regulatory cost recovery fee is?
The name for a lobbyists, but
What is that again, Mayor? A regulatory?
Regulatory cost recovery.
I think it'll be interesting to see what they ask or how they explain that. I know one of the things they've done with cable bills, I'll just use this as an explanation of why some of their answers haven't made sense. You get charged a package for your video, 100 and whatever channels. They have had to start paying more money to the broadcast channels to put the broadcast channels on their cable system. So NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox. Instead of putting those increases into the fee, into the bundled package, they've taken a piece of it, like $14.15, and put broadcast recovery fee. Similar for regional sports channels, Fox Sports Rocky Mountain, Altitude before they kicked Altitude off their network, AT&T Sportsnet, those kind of things. those costs are going up too. Instead of building that into their package, so you know what you're paying for, they've taken out 14 or 15 bucks there and put it on and said, regional sports fee. They admit that's not all the regional sports fees. They pay some of the regional sports fees are part of the package of what their subscribers pay. It's a way that they can generate more revenue without consumers thinking that the price that they're paying just went up. Oh, it just looks like another tax or regulatory fee. So it's incredibly non-transparent and not consumer friendly. And I have the same curiosity and questions about that other line item as I did with the municipal fee. So we'll get to that.
So with that being said, how much influence or control can we have for our residents to ensure that there is clear billing and billing that is understandable by everybody instead of this hidden? And I mean, it's the hidden fees is a business practice that I think they probably got from the ticket industry. And, you know, those people will tell you that you can go see a show for $10 and then slap $100 in fees on top of it, making it a $110 ticket, but they sold you on $10 for a ticket. So how do we have the ability to put forth requirements that bills that go to our residents have to be clear and concise?
At some point, I'm going to answer your question here, and I'm also going to let you know that to get into the details of some thoughts about really how we do that, we may want to have an executive session at some point because these involve legal issues. Under federal law, the only area where local governments can impose regulations that are more stringent than the federal regulations are customer service standards. Arguably, I mean, customer service standard are things like you make an appointment, you got to give them a 2-hour window. If they don't show up, if your guy doesn't show up, you got to pay a credit. If you're doing work in somebody's yard, you got to give them 24 hours notice, or those kinds of things. You have to have somebody available to answer phones 24/7. I would argue that transparent billing for cable service is a valid topic that can be considered in customer service standards. Comcast will say two things in response to that, probably more than two. One is they don't think it's a valid consumer protection issue. They think it's rate regulation. They think you're regulating their rates if you tell them what they have to put on their bill and how to put things on their bill. And we're not allowed under federal law to do rate regulation. So that kind of dispute could end up in litigation. So somebody would have to decide this is important enough for us that we're happy to litigate this. I think the other thing to know is that they will say correctly that you can impose customer service standards on them, but they're allowed to take whatever it costs them to implement whatever processes they need to comply with your customer service standards and pass them through to subscribers. So one of the things you might hear is, oh, well, if we had to change our bills just in Commerce City and put all these things on them that nobody else has asked us to put on, it's going to cost us X $100,000 or X $1 million to buy the software to reconfigure this or that, and we're going to be charging your citizens for the cost of that. It's a fair question, and it's an absolutely fair discussion to have with them. And I think if there's a way that we can do that and try to get to some kind of understanding without going down a path that's going to generate a ton of legal fees, it's a great issue, and it's something that we ought to at least see how it unfolds and then come back to you in an executive session and give you an update. And if there are other options that we want to consider as negotiating strategy at that point, you can tell us in that context.
Thank you.
Matt, does that work for you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't want to stop.
No.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate the update. Look forward to the executive session and further discussion in the future.
Okay, thank you all.
All right, last up is the Criminal Justice Center follow-up discussion. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Mayor. So while Trent's taking some time to get set up, obviously when we came to you all last beginning of August 1, you all gave us some direction to kind of go out and try to find some ability to kind of deliver an immediate solution within the next couple of years and being able to construct a longer term solution for our growing needs within the PD department. We've taken that better part of the year, month and a half, kind of work through those details and opportunities with our PD team on what may be available for us in the interim. But at the same time, while we were doing such, we thought it was also prudent to kind of go back, take another look at, right, this conversation around substation, criminal justice center, and it didn't impact our timeline at all. So we thought, well, let's get this information out to council because they may find it interesting as it relates to ultimately the direction we take for the long-term future for our public safety needs in the Northern Range, but also within the core city. So what you find in tonight's presentation is what we think we can do immediately with your direction and guidance to, what is, our plan of attack with being able to have a conversation with our residents and our stakeholders out in the community about a real strong communication plan and around this effort. And then lastly, do we continue down this path of a criminal justice center, or is the information around substation compelling enough to say, let's really think about this? So, Trent, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I had all of those written down in my notes verbatim, so I don't know where Jason got that, but we will, tonight we're gonna be reviewing kind of a little bit of what we've discussed previously about the Criminal Justice Center, how we've responded to some of council's feedback, some of their inquiries regarding additional information so that we can make the best decision going forward. We're gonna break this down into two different conversations. We're gonna talk about the immediate term needs, which was a priority of council at our last conversation, then the long-term planning. The only thing I would add to what Jason said is that we're gonna talk about this alternative option tonight, these substations, and I wanna reiterate, and I'll discuss it again. It does not preclude us from exploring a criminal justice center in the future if we choose to, if council so chooses to pursue the substation option. These can be complementary, even though for the purposes of explaining the program, it may come off as a one or the other. That is not the case. So obviously, difficulties with staffing, difficulties with meeting service levels compelled us to have this conversation. Public safety is obviously one of the major strategic priorities for council. And so we want to be able to address that on the short term as well. And we did that through two different conversations. So we explored some additional communications information, as well as some short-term facilities. Starting with the facilities, obviously, our current facilities are insufficient to meet our needs. Right now, we only have the headquarters here, as well as the small substation on the northern range off of 104th. Regardless of what we do long-term, we will need some sort of short-term solution. So staff has engaged with the broker that we were using before, and they have identified some potential locations on both the northwestern and the northeastern sides of town for retrofitting or use for a potential substation in the immediate future. So if council so chooses, that is something that we can bring back in an executive session, and we can continue to explore those options to provide that short-term solution, again, not precluding our long-term options. PD leadership has also been working with HR and community relations on some expanded advertising and strategic recruiting, increased outreach, and ensuring that our salary and benefits are competitive, not just to the region, but to the specific municipalities and specific areas that we know we're losing candidates to. Thornton and Aurora are prime examples of those municipalities. Staff has also engaged in conversations with Slate Communications and began the process of creating a communications plan for these expanded facilities. Whether or not we choose to just do one or two substations or the full criminal justice center, there will be a communications component necessary in this. In the packet, you will see there is a high-level communications plan. It is very, very generic because we don't have the details of exactly what we'd be doing yet. But essentially, it outlines that part of this process running concurrently with the construction, with the design, everything like that. It will also include community engagement, stakeholder outreach, and some consistent communication so that we are reassuring our residents, particularly in the core city, that any sort of expansion in the northern range is not lessening the amount of resources that we are devoting to the core city. It is merely providing more opportunities on the northern range. Discussing the long-term needs, Public safety as a department has projected that they will have around or over 300 employees in the future. So our current facilities can't even hold our current staffing, therefore we need some sort of expansion. On August 1st, we discussed the Consolidated Criminal Justice Center, which would move police headquarters, all of police administration and the municipal courts and their staff to one facility on the Northern Range. In the past month and a half, 2 months, we've re-engaged with HOK to explore a substation or a series of substations, as you'll see in the program. Regardless of these facilities, they would need to be located in the Northern Range. And like I just mentioned, the Civic Centers would serve as a sub-police headquarters and would not see any sort of reduced staffing. Council provided us with a lot of good feedback on the Consolidated Criminal Justice Center, and there was additional information asked about whether exploring a shorter or a smaller facility in the form of a substation or series of substation would help A, reduce the cost, and B, reduce the construction timeline for these facilities. We have then worked with HOK to have them come up with a preliminary program that was included in your packet tonight. That program is not to the same level of detail as the Criminal Justice Center was, but it accomplishes all of the same goals. It helps us understand what the footprint of the facility may need to look like and what the potential cost of a new build facility would be overall. Now, it's important to understand what we're talking about when we talk about a substation. Substations actually have multiple different meanings depending on what facility or what municipality you're actually talking about. And our interpretation based on our conversations with Director Myers and the rest of the PD leadership, they are envisioning a substation as a touchdown center for patrol officers. It is a place that they can work, check in the mornings, book people in custody and utilize that facility without having to travel all the way to the Southern Range. It would not contain any sort of administrative capacity. It would have limited storage and resources in terms of that. It would retain all of that in the current center at the Civic Center. It would also include some community space for public interactions and PD events. If we're expanding, we want to make sure that there is an area for them to host community town halls, some maybe public trainings and public outreach events. And then, like I said, limited booking and limited holding spaces. Based off of PD's input, if we did choose to go this direction, without the Criminal Justice Center component, we would need at least 2 different substations to support the growth in just the need of the staff alone. In our study, based off of some just preliminary projections, the first projected substation could be completed end of 2024. And then the second one, depending on how we tiered that out, we projected to be 2029. That obviously is not something that we are held to. These are just estimates for your edification to understand kind of our timeline that we're working over. And again, a reminder, creating one substation or 2 substations does not mean that long-term council cannot plan for a criminal justice center on the Northern Range. So what does this report actually say? Well, it says that we are going to need right around 26,000 square feet or 26,000 square feet and across a little over an acre of land. Those costs in 2024 dollars would be anywhere from $15.5 to $17 million. And then the second one, which I would give pay less attention to the actual numbers, more of the escalation. We're looking at 2029, $23.5 to $25.5 million. So if we're comparing this to the Consolidated Criminal Justice Center, we're looking at almost a little over a third of the total space with 2 substations, but we're also looking at about half the cost with varying completion dates. Again, these are just estimates. The Consolidated Criminal Justice Center would be able to contain and hold more of our staff, freeing up space at the Civic Center as well. But this is a good comparison to understand the relationship between the building, the timeline, and the overall size of the facilities that we will be getting. And just some comparisons here. I'll just go over some highlights. Like I said, Moving with the Consolidated Criminal Justice Center, it does meet that long-term need and prevents cost escalations. Unfortunately, there's no reason to believe that costs of construction are going to go down in any time soon. So while those numbers may be shocking to some, it's not going to get better absent some drastic change in the economy. So it prevents cost escalation if we move forward with that early. It also frees up space at the Civic Center, moving the headquarters and moving everything closer to the jail on the Northern Range as well. Obviously, there's significant higher costs, and that does not solve the immediate term need. For the substations, what I would like to emphasize is that it provides some broader coverage. That was some feedback that we received from councils. We want to make sure that we're providing services to all of the Northern Range, which is why we explored both facilities in the northeast and northwestern sides of the city. And then it can work in tandem with the consolidated solution. Constructing one of these substations can still work with a consolidated criminal justice center. Obviously, one of the cons is that multiple locations, if we chose to just go with substations, multiple locations would be needed to meet our needs by 2030. And then the headquarters would remain in the core city despite the growth projections. So the decision points that we've laid out for council, we're essentially looking for feedback, input, and direction on two different things. On the immediate term, what is council looking for in terms of the short-term substation proposal? Is that something that council is largely interested in? Would you like to hear more about properties? How would you like us to proceed? And then long-term, how does council feel about the Consolidated Criminal Justice Center having this additional information? Is this something that we want to move forward with now, table for a later discussion? And both myself, Jason, and our consultants with HOK are on the line to answer any technical questions that you may have. Thank you.
This has triggered a lot of concerns for me. And it seems like our police department right now is not in shape. Police right now, we are understaffed from what I understand. And in some of these numbers in here, if it was based on the number of employees that we need and not on what we have right now. And I remember former Chief Nichols saying on several occasions that we need to get our house in order first. And I feel like, this, especially the Criminal Justice Center, has really been pushed. And it's also based on the fact that they're expecting the number of residents in the city to meet 100,000. And that to me says that we are going to become the bedroom community that I don't want this community to become. As Councilmember Hurst mentioned earlier, the population in Brighton is only at 41,000 and that's in the 2022. In 2020, it was only 38,000. So that's like only, what, 3,000 more people moving into Brighton. And we're anticipating 100,000. That seems imbalanced to me. So to me, I really feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. And it's being, not only are we doing that, but we're expediting this. So it's like, we have to make this decision really fast. I don't think that we've looked at what maybe all of our options could be. How we looked at land that the city already owns. Is there a possibility of doing something next to Bison Ridge? On the property there. I think the substation at this point is the way to go, but I also think that we need to really take our time in examining this, and I'm feeling like this is being rushed. So those are some of my concerns right now, so I really think that we need to examine this, what our possibilities are and what the needs are. And are there other municipalities that are similar to us that have the need for do they have a judicial system? Do they have the need for it? I mean, that's kind of something that I feel like is on the level of the county, not necessarily the us as a municipality. So those are just some of my concerns, and I just thought I would throw them out there to begin with.
So appreciate the concerns, ma'am. I will work backwards, and maybe the terminology or how we're using criminal justice center can be a little confusing, because I think what we're really saying is we're taking what's in this building and simply moving it north, and it being a bigger facility to occur with the growth that's gonna happen up to 2045.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we're also looking to start bringing in services for the people who are already here, as far as commercial and retail and things like that, you know, so we've got to be thinking in that direction. I mean, this just, it seems more than what is necessary, in my opinion.
So a couple of things there as well. You brought up a couple of good factors and good points. I think having this full kind of breadth of information allows for us to be a little bit more strategic in how we think about that next step. Part of that communication plan is continuing to call more information, particularly from our stakeholders, about what and where and how we meet their needs. I think we've all heard from our community up in the Northern Range and into Core City that there is a concern around public safety and being able to have access to the public safety when the time is needed. So when we're thinking about that, how do we start to meet that need today and in the future?
Wouldn't it be with having enough people to fill the roles of patrolling? And I mean, if you don't have the people to fill the building, why are you building the building? Like, you know, we've got to think about how do we attract and maintain the people who are actually doing the work. And the other thing, I mean, I've also been thinking about is we have a part-time judge, and the crimes that are committed are basically on the municipal level. And so
So to that, I know to Director Myers and Acting Chief Sater's good efforts, they are working holistically on, with HRS, noted in the presentation, on how to really attack the recruitment, the retention, and expansion. I think with respect to this facility, I'll let Director Myers speak for himself, but in my opinion, we're out of space. And it's caused issues and concerns that have also led to potentially some of the staff that we've seen go out the door. So this also becomes a part of the recruitment tool for being able to attract that high quality talent that we know exists out there in the market. Now, I'll say the other issue that we have is also geographic. If you look at how we are cut up with the arsenal being in the middle, it creates challenges for people stationed here to get to the north in a timely fashion, to get to that tier 1 call. So I think what we heard, like I said, I'm gonna go back to it, is these solutions are 2 and 4 or 5 years out. We gotta figure something out now. And I think particularly the first question I asked myself and I asked all of us here is, all right, we have to get creative, and we're getting creative about the immediate substation that's going to be a helpful recruitment tool for the director and the rest of his command staff and his deputy chiefs. The bigger question is going to be, as we all know, costs are going up. Land in the northern range, if we take this, I'll call it patchwork approach of maybe substation 1, 2 substations plus the criminal justice center over the course of our growth of the city, how do we do that? And how do we do that in a fiscally sound way that we can actually accomplish? I think where I go with this is you all have a lot of information, and we're not trying to rush you to make a decision. I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that we're meeting that test of, let's go get a substation, and then let's figure out that next stage, whether that's a criminal justice center or whether that's an additional substation. We're more than willing to go and answer those questions. Your other question about 100,000 people, that's a council policy discussion and decision. I mean, that was established with the comp plan back in 2010. Clearly calls out that we're anticipated to grow to 180,000 people. Even if we stop growing today, we've got 35,000 units in the pipeline based on what we have approved in PUDs that would add another 50 to 80,000 people. So, and we're already sitting at 70,000 people. So it kind of comes back to that question, because they're looking at ultimately where the city wants to go and how do they keep up with that. If the city council, based on what they're hearing from the community, wants to change that, we're game for having that conversation. But it's following what's already been that established policy direction on who and how we're going to grow as a city.
And to another one of your questions, what are other cities doing? We've definitely taken comparisons with, and HOK has worked really hard to find other cities across the country, but our courts administrator has also been fielding a lot of questions lately from other municipalities in the Denver metro area about potentially expanding their facility. And I think it's really telling which different municipalities she's hearing from, because she's heard from Brighton and Englewood, which are municipalities about half the size of us, looking to plan for the future. And then they're also hearing from Westminster, which is a city of almost 120,000 people, trying to play catch up and building that type of criminal justice center, that consolidated facility. So I think it shows, the variety of approaches there. And like Jason said, this is a discussion for council where we're not trying to rush anything. We're just meeting what council has requested.
Councilmember Hurst, then Councilmember Noble.
Yeah, I think we need more immediate solutions for sure. I think the Justice Center is a hard financial discussion to have, $90 million, I think 91 was the. But I also think if we wait, it's 125. And I'm not even talking a long-term wait. That balloons from 90 to 125 million in the next 5 or so years. And I think our current options for short-term are $50 million. So we're essentially looking at a $200 million problem if we go to substation. Not a problem, but solution if we go to substation route, because we're ultimately going to need the criminal justice center, similar to what Thornton's built, not maybe a criminal justice center, but a bigger first responder center, if you will, because they're mixing their fire department and everything else. We don't have a fire department, but it doesn't mean we're not going to continue to, have relationships with our current fire department and, find uses for multiple use. I know we balked at the parking lot trailers, and I still don't regret that decision, because I think what you said, Jason, is absolutely right. When I first got to CDOT, we're in this old school building with, you could see visually the black mold. And I'm not saying that's our situation here, but I sure wasn't stoked to go to that building every day for work. And then we moved to the new building and it's like, I could see myself working here for a long time. Just because if all things are the same, if we go to Aurora and we go to Brighton and we go to Westminster and we look at how much they're paying their staff and we're matching that, we're matching their compensation package. Now things like this really start to matter from a retention and recruiting standpoint. I mean, you can go into the sports world and see the same thing. You can go in a lot of different ways. And it's again about that kind of community at work, you know, where you spend a huge piece of your life in your professional working place. And fortunately, unfortunately, whatever you want to say this, a lot of time spent in your cruiser, your police car as a police officer. But when you get back to your facility, when you're done with your day, you probably would like to have a place to be able to put your stuff and have a nice place, maybe even to shower and take care of yourself at the end of the long shift. So I do see value in all of these things. I think, I almost said we handcuff ourselves. That's not really what I meant. But yeah, I mean, we do handcuff ourselves a bit in the sense of doing substations. And the only reason I say that is because we have this kind of plethora of needs, you know, as the city grows. You know, the 100,000, I don't, you know, with the economy changes, who knows when that happens, but I look at a city like Arvada that blew up relatively quickly in a decade. The reason they blew up is because the amount of space that they had near, not the Arsenal, but their, you know, similar situation that they have. And that happened, again, in a decade, and that's where we're looking at. Doesn't mean it's gonna happen, no. There's a lot of market things that could change that or accelerate it, honestly, who knows? But what I worry about with all of this is getting behind and you're in an even worse situation, both financially and crime. The problem is $91 million is a lot of money. I mean, that is, we're talking equivalent to an annual budget almost here. And, you know, I know the mayor's had some ideas about how we're gonna fund this. And I think him and I both said, well, you know, those are great ideas until you start to see the actual cost per unit or, you know, that tax. It's pretty high. It's just add that on top of our other needs and it gets high quickly. And so I think this is a tough one, but it's not one that I expect us to solve in the next, you know, week or two, but I do want to see maybe not the, you know, temporary trailers in the parking lot, but what's that more immediate, you know, 6-month solution.
So let's tackle that.
To get us 2 years down the road.
So let's tackle that. One of the things that we've been talking and that we've had some internal conversations around is that we've got a boatload of industrial warehouse land and new buildings that are being constructed. They present different opportunities, right? We're not talking black mold, we're not talking parking lot trailers. We're talking places that have, you know, roll-up doors that provide secure environments potentially for police cruisers. We're talking about spaces that may have, you know, a modicum of office space for people to come drop their bags and be able to, right, rest before they have to get back out there. But that to us, you know, is something that's an immediate solution that, right, with direction, right, can meet that 6 to 8 month turnaround for getting something tenant fitted up to be able to meet PD's needs. And now we've got an established location that maybe you plant a flag and you stay there as part of that long-term solution. And now you have a little bit more freedom and flexibility to be thinking about, okay, where do I get from 2029 on? Is that another substation? Is that a criminal justice center? What's the community center? So I think maybe we tackle it like that. Let's start with the immediate solution of, you know, there's some warehouse opportunities. Is council comfortable with us getting creative and heading down that path to ultimately come back to you and say, hey, we've got 3 properties, we've got 4 properties, or we've got 2 properties. Here's the price, but, you know, ultimately this is for the greater good for our community. What say you? So I put that out there on the table.
I had industrial at the top of my list. making use of industrial space because ultimately there's way too much of it. I mean, there just is. So here we are, and we could take any one of them and do that, retrofit it for a substation, and a lot of them are brand new. And they're just looking for people to take over. I don't know if we have any, we don't have any condo industrial space though, do we?
I believe we do, or that they can easily kind of parcel it out so that, right, you can be in a multi-building, but I don't know what the level of comfort that might be with PD. That's something that we would have to investigate and bring it back to you. But like I said, there's a number of opportunities.
Okay, so I have other questions. So on what basis was the decision made on northwest first versus northeast? You want to write the questions down and start. Northwest versus northeast, on what basis? There was a mention about something being closer to the jail. I just want to make a point that anything that is off of E470 over in that northeast corner is not closer to the jail, because you get on E470 and you go nowhere. I mean, you can't get to the jail. You can't get to 76 because they didn't arrange that right. But you'd only know
Sable
that.
has an interchange coming in 3 years.
Well, a long time. I mean, there's gonna be an interchange at Sable, but
It's already planned.
yeah, but how many years?
It's almost done with the sign, so.
I thought Sable was first.
Yeah, that's Sable. It'll take you right to,
Yes, but that's not by 104th and 470, for example, and in the old, if you think about open areas in the northeast. And then where is the crime by numbers that requires a cell?
I went into that.
In terms of regions of Commerce City, where are the hubs of crime that require a cell? Because you don't want to move that away from them. And the last one is census results. We did not get the census results of the 2020 census. Is that the last one?
yes.
2020. Okay, we didn't get those results because we were told that the city was protesting them. So what are the census results? Where are we actually in Commerce City right today? Because I need to better understand. I think for me, these whole plans are missing those kinds of details that tell me where things are logical and make sense. Otherwise, it's splat. And I don't want to do 15 or 25 or $90 million worth of splat.
Gotcha, fair enough. So let me start with the census results. I know I sent an email a long time ago, so that's back in February, where we were projected at 68,000 people. I take issue with that because of what we see in the year-over-year permit activity here in the city. So that's where it's led us to appeal with our census numbers. We believe we're somewhere closer to 70 to 71,000. If you look at our permit activity, we'll probably add another 3,500 to 4,000 people at the end of this year.
Yeah, but we have to base it on 2020. All I want is a 2020 number. And has that been resolved yet?
No, we're still appealing that, and we probably won't know what that appeal decision is until next year. So, and their numbers are very different than the state's numbers that they have with this with Dover. But we'll get you that information. As it relates to where the crime is at by numbers that require a cell, we'll have to work with PD on being able to get that information. I don't have that at our fingertips, but we'll make sure that we'll get that to you. And this question about Northeast versus Northwest, and really it's more of a, an experiential and an expertise conversation that we had with PD because of the parts of the city that we have to provide support to, right? We have a portion of our city, I'll say, east and west of Highway 2 that require some level of service. So when we think about northeast, northwest, we're really thinking about how we position those locations that then give immediate access to whether it's Bell Creek, whether it's in our more industrial areas in Irondale, and then in our northern range. So partly that's how we kind of looked at those two kind of halo effects of where they would be located.
I understand that, and then I want to know where the crime is, because it matters. If Bell Creek is the safest neighborhood in all of Commerce City, then it wouldn't make sense in the same fashion. If it's not only the safest, but there's also far fewer people who live west of Highway 2, then it doesn't necessarily make sense the same way. I mean, those are just things that I'm considering as someone who lives here.
Perfect. Definitely, we can get you that information.
But I would want to know those numbers. However, industrial retrofitting makes so much more sense to me. And there's opportunities on both ends. And maybe both ends could be taken care of then.
Thank you.
Just my personal opinion, I definitely wouldn't suggest that's the only place we look, because industrial buildings are built for a purpose and there's a ton of demand for it right now. And so the costs are going to be skyrocketed because of that demand, especially if there's a pause on industrial development. I've seen some recent projections that we are significantly short on industrial supply warehousing in Colorado right now, to the point where when we talk about housing is short compared to what we're talking about needs for industrial warehousing coming up because of the lack of retail. Warehousings are replacing retail because of online shopping. And so those demands obviously skyrocket price, which puts us in a similar spot of what we're talking about in terms of, $25 million for a substation, and could cause that, to extend the amount of time that we have. So I think industrial is probably the best situation for us to walk into for a short term. I just don't want to pin ourselves in a corner because of some of those other market demands. Do we currently have a cell that we utilize? Like for a holding cell?
Yeah, we have holding cells in this facility.
But is it capacity? I guess I've seen it.
Yeah.
Like, are we using it enough?
We don't use it for anything other than short-term. Anybody getting incarcerated goes to the county jail.
Right.
So that's set up for overnight.
It is strictly while paperwork is getting
It's a
done.
processing cell.
Right.
Okay. So, and that's where I completely agree with Councilwoman Noble, but its use also matters to me, because it's like, if you just need one in the north and you just need one in the south for a processing cell, then I'm not sure it matters greatly about where it's at. It's about, that ability to service. Because the other thing for Councilwoman Noble's comments is, let's define what northeast means. Because if it's east of E470, there's no reason for us to build it out there right now. But if it's, Chambers Road, then maybe that makes more sense from a centralized location. I just don't know what you guys fully mean by northeast. Is that northeast on our full growth area, or is that northeast on our current setting right now? Because I agree with Councilwoman Noble. It's like that matters quite a bit in terms of location.
Today, current setting today, right? We can only project, I think, with some level of comfort and assurance where we'll be at by the end of this decade. So we're looking at where we think we'll be at the end of this decade in the northeast, northwest. Anything that happens outside of that, it's anybody's game to project. So that's why we're looking at it today with where the growth is going to occur that we know is being built.
And some additional considerations to your point about the holding cells and the conversations that we've had with PD leadership. The concern that we are looking to address, and this is a tension we're trying to balance, what is the actual uses versus what is the potential usage, is do we have enough facilities if we were to have two people at once? if we were to have potentially, we're processing an adult and a minor at the same time, those need to be separate facilities. And so those are some of the concerns that just for your edification, something that we're considering that goes into this conversation. So a lot of this may seem like over planning, but the idea when it comes to a lot of these, when it comes to the safety of minors, the safety of women, that sort of stuff, there is a level of over planning that we have to do.
So we only have one holding cell. I know in the other building, that Adams 14 currently occupies, they had like 3 or 4 cells there because I helped renovate that to turn it into the Hope Resource Center.
We have multiple holding cells. We're required by law to separate juveniles from adults. It's best practice to separate the genders. And it's a very common evidence-based police practice that, let's say you have, like we did the other night, a robbery report come in, and there were 3 offenders, 2 males and a female. You don't want to lodge 2 of those people together talking about getting their stories together while you're booking one. You have a different patrol car, transport each one individually, and you lodge them in separate cells where they can't talk with each other. That's not an uncommon scenario. So you want to have enough and balance that with, we don't need a full jail because we don't lodge people overnight. It's a balance.
So how many do we have?
I think right now we have one that holds more than one and a couple that hold individuals. So probably 3 adult cells and 1 juvenile cell, but
So there's 4.
I'd have to look into it, but my gut tells me we have at least 4 currently.
Oh, so that's something that you are not familiar with then?
Well, I've been down there, but it's not burned in my memory, cell
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You know what I also want to go back to is the offer from the fire department to share their space in the northwest. You're talking about something in the northwest when they offered for free a substation to the CCPD. And no matter how you look at it, there's going to be a railroad track involved. So if you're looking at the northwest, at a minimum, and they were saying that they wanted to share the animal, the animal facility that they took over, the pond.
Yeah, they converted that to a training center exclusively. And we're in active discussions with them on using that space for much of our training. Our SWAT team will use it regularly. We can practice active shooter training. A lot of things we're going to partner with the fire district over 2 weeks.
Oh, that's good. Is there still space left to have a substation there? That was what they offered.
It's purely set up for training currently.
Now it is, because we didn't take them up on the offer. Okay.
A couple of things that I wanted to bring up. First, I think it's obvious that the growth for Commerce Cities in the Northeast. It's obvious that $90+ million is a lot to bite off and chew at one time. It's obvious that prices are going up on land. And instead of spending $25, $35 million on a couple of substations, ultimately this community is going to have a justice center. And it's biting it all off at one time. I think that makes it difficult. I would prefer, instead of putting $25, $35 million in substations, knowing that eventually we're going to have a justice center anyway, acquiring the land that you need and being able to build it in phases so that we can meet the need of the community at the time and add on to it as necessary for the growth. So make sure we have the right amount of land design the building so that it could be added on to over time to meet the full need of build out of the city, or at least for the next couple of centuries. You know, and instead of fighting off $90 million, acquire the land, because the land's gonna double in value by the time you ever get to that point. And start out with a facility the size of what we need, that's not $90 million all at once. And then build onto it, add onto it as needed, instead of trying to spend $35 million on substations that are additionally gonna be throwaway when you eventually get the Justice Center. So I'm trying to benefit the residents the best use of their money, instead of trying to rent industrial and all these other type of things.
That was gonna be my question, is that you're looking at this not in party with going into an industrial building or going into an existing space. You're just saying, you know what, just bypass that for the next 18 months. And let's go find land that's 10 to 15 acres, build a 22,000 square foot building. And then as we grow, we build on to that building.
That would be my thought, to make best use of the taxpayers' money, instead of having this throwaway component.
Okay.
Jennifer? Yeah, I had a question. That's what I would like to get clarified too, and have a visual map of it, actually, what is the northeastern and the two areas that you're talking about. And then how does Commerce City have any land itself available in the northern area?
We do next to Bison Ridge, that was, I think, raised by you, council member. However, that's slated for obviously an expansion of the Bison Ridge Park. We do have an area on the southeast side of E470 and 120 that would be able to meet the needs. However, that's a regional detention basin, so we can't touch that. We went even as far as not just looking at our property, but looking at CDOT property, looking at Adams County property, looking at other municipally owned property that we may be able to pick up or purchase. It's very limited in the Northern Range. So I think that's where it kind of led us into looking at private property to meet our needs, whether it's that 1 acre to 15 acres.
And then to your question about the northeast, northwest, I completely appreciate the conversation there. I think the reason why we're using that terminology is that, just like everything else, this is estimates. And if council so chooses, what we bring back in executive session are maps that have these specific locations in place that, for our purpose of talking in generalities in the public setting, is we're categorizing as the northwestern part of the city versus the northeastern part of the city. I wouldn't get too hung up on that at this point, because the actual properties that we are able to pursue are not going to be determined by any arbitrary interpretation of northwest versus northeast.
And does Commerce City currently have a contract like with the Adams County Sheriff's Department? Like say you book someone, does Commerce City have like any type of contracts with the Adams County Sheriffs as far as like inmates, or how does that work?
We have to, as all municipalities in the county, have to pay for persons lodged under municipal ordinance. But if they violate state law, which at this point the jail's only going to take felonies, not misdemeanors, we don't have to pay for those. That's their obligation as a county jail to take our felony prisoners. So we only pay for those inmates booked under municipal ordinance, and
Yes, it is.
that's not very many, I would imagine.
No, it is dictated by an IGA. It's a multi-party IGA that sets the numbers for the local Adams County municipalities and how many people we can have under, like as Director Meyer said, how many people can have their house on municipal charges.
And just for council, I did just re-forward the email about the census data to you also, that you have it. At the time in 2020, they said we were at 62,418. When we did our permit analysis, we thought we were at 64,100. So we appeal that because obviously that has an impact on how much we get from HUD, on how we look at federal grant funds, particularly with the BIF and bill funding with obviously that. So that's why we had made that appeal. I think our numbers still hold true that we're closer to 71,000 today, working our way through 2022. But we've got Jim and his team working to confirm that so that we can make that application.
Also on crime data, you can go on our website right now and look at all 8 patrol beats, 4 in the south, 4 in the north. And we list monthly, maybe weekly, but I'm thinking monthly, the actual crimes that occurred in each of those beats. So that'll give you an immediate, real-time indication of where crime is.
That'd be great.
So
Thanks.
can you guys also, give us a list of what all the properties that you guys just mentioned that you said the city does own, but what about the property on 120th that used to be the Tomahawk truck stop?
In the city of Brighton.
Oh, that's the county.
Yeah,
Purchase it from Brighton.
and it is a hot mess.
It's unincorporated as the county.
No one wants to touch that because of the cleanup that's gonna happen. Well,
We can definitely get a map of the city properties that we have. Would you also like us to include CDOT properties, ADCO's properties, or Adams County properties as well?
May as well. We're annexing them anyway.
I would say as long as it's within our growth boundary.
So what was the status on that appeal?
Jim, census appeal? I mean, we're still working on that application because there's a deadline for submittal, but census appeal?
Yeah, we've gone through the mapping part of it, finished that. And then we're working on going piece by piece to look at the housing data and the numbers to make sure that they look right. I mean, it's not too encouraging, but we're still going through trying to figure it out. Hopefully in the next 30 days, we'll have it ready to file, which is, they will not consider it, as Jason said earlier, until next year, even if we file it now.
Yeah.
Having worked part-time for the Census Bureau in 2020, I will encourage the city to continue their appeal.
Yeah.
Because I think many communities had an undercount.
They don't give you a lot of hope when they're working with you, but still gotta do the good fight.
When I asked Google today, it said 65,718.
Are they doing the appeal for us? Is that?
They could, who knows? You ain't gonna ask.
Google appeal the census.
So there's a lot of, obviously, I know we put a lot more information in front of you. You asked us to go do some homework. So we went and did some homework. In addition to that, we also wanted to make sure that you all knew comfortably whether the criminal justice center is the right decision, or do we really look at effectively in 2024 dollars, 15 million for a substation, 2029, 25, and right, being able to deploy for our community quicker, faster, and so forth. Now, that's just a discussion for all of us to be able to have on how we take that next step, because obviously we've heard from the community, we've heard from you all, we have to take some next step.
We need more information.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
Still, not about the building itself, but about the foundation for the request.
And that's fair, and that's fair.
Mr. City Manager, could I just make one perception correction about the existing quote unquote substation? We do not have a substation.
no.
Okay. I think of a substation, think of a big city with a central post office. And they might have postal substations where they have PO boxes, you can mail packages, full service. We basically have a storefront where there isn't enough room for all the officers even to park their squad cars. It's just a place to pop in, use the bathroom, get out of the streets, maybe sit and write a report. We still operate as a central singular police station. The north roll call briefings are conducted here, and an hour later, the south precinct or district roll call briefings are handled here. So north side cops could be in briefing and get a call way in the northeast, you know, where you have to pack your lunch to get there, and they're responding from here. We do not have a North District substation. I just want to make sure we're on our terminology correct.
So thank you, and that brings up my point of all this. The idea of a criminal justice center is grand. It's beautiful, it's a goal to work for. I think everybody would agree that that's what we want to do. But between now and when it opens in 2025, early 2026, what do you do to combat that issue that you have of a storefront? And I've been in there multiple times and I've ridden with your officers on multiple occasions and gone in there myself. What do we do to fix that today? How do we begin to provide better public safety services for our residents today? How do we start to instill trust in the services being provided by our residents today? And we can continue on this path of growing towards this criminal justice center, and we need to continue on that path, and we need to be doing everything we can to lock in the prices as quickly as possible to make it so that it is affordable to do so. But we still do not have that answer of how do we address everything that Director Myers just said about the inadequacy of the facility today. And that is why was my big reason for raising my hand and saying, no, I don't want to focus on this criminal justice center, because you're not focusing on today's problem. Now, 2 substations, probably not the way to go, because we're still projected out at 2024. That doesn't solve the problem of today. What are we going to do for 23 and 24 to take care of this issue? The idea of 2 substations is not ideal. I could see 1 substation in your criminal justice center. That's a second substation, but 2 small substations is not there. So my challenge is, where can you today walk in and identify a vacant building, vacant piece of property that we can set up and be up and running in the next 3 to 6 months with a facility that is going to address every single point that Director Myers made?
So we have, and that's where Trenton was going with our immediate solution. We have that. We need direction in an exec session for us to go execute that.
Okay, let's talk about that Monday night.
Perfect.
All right. All right. Anybody else have anything to add on that?
That's it.
Okay.
That was me too.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Appreciate your time. Thank you, Director Myers. Appreciate everything that you contributed in that conversation. Everybody else. We're going to move on to reports. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. Kicking off, coming out of our office, the president signed an executive order stating that we can no longer use our armored vehicle, our MRAP, in counter drug efforts. So this obviously raises a huge safety issue for our SWAT members. So we're going to be taking steps to prepare a budget ordinance amendment so that we can purchase a Bearcat, which falls within that realm of being able to have counter drug efforts. So we plan on bringing that to you all here rather quickly for your action so that we can make that purchase. With respect to economic development, this coming Wednesday from 10 to 11, we have a groundbreaking at Performance Food Services Denver. It's a new facility that will retain 168 current employees in Commerce City. We'll also add an additional 145 over the next 10 years. And we'll bring about $64 million worth of new capital investment to the city. So a very good get for us. This Friday, we have a table at the Metro Denver Site Selection Conference, feedback breakfast. That is from 7:30 to 9 at Empower Field at Mile High. Please let economic development know if you would like to attend. We've got 1 spot left. And then this Saturday, we've got 2 new business ribbon cuttings, one being Adventure Dental Vision and Orthodontics off of 6075 Parkway Drive. That ribbon cutting is at 8:30. And then we have My Happy Place Yoga School and Wellness Center by Bella Yoga, which is also opening a new location at 74th Avenue. That ribbon cutting is at 11 a.m. And just as a kind of a note for your calendars, October 13th at Bison Bridge Rec Center will be the State of the City luncheon. With Public Works, we're continuing to mow and string trim the property owner's fence line that backs to the Second Creek open space. Sierra Landscape helped out last week by cleaning weeds in our shrub beds and cutting down unwanted tree suckers that are growing in Fairfax Park. With Adams County government and with DRCOG, they approved a $3.8 million request for 88th Avenue multimodal pedestrian connectivity. That'll be coming before you all on the 3rd. But they also approved $200,000 for an E64 corridor study. You all received an email from me earlier today that between Highway 2 to Quebec Parkway, that we're going to be lowering the speed from 35 to 30 miles an hour. Our staff went out there and was able to meet with some residents that shared their concerns on matters in and around that. So we're actually going to go back, look at some additional traffic control studies, with that being a 4-way stop, also looking at a traffic signal and other potential improvements. So we'll make sure to keep you all apprised of that. There's also been continued mowing operations along Highway 2, right? We've completed southbound, now we're working on northbound. And we know that there were a number of different missing signs in and along 60th Avenue and Highway 2. So staff and team put efforts together over the weekend to get those signs back up. And we're continuing to keep working on installing speed hump signs on 62nd Avenue. With that, that is my report.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Rogers?
What is it? You said a Bearcat?
Bearcat.
What's that?
I may butcher this, so, Director Myers, pick me up where I fall, but it's just a special SWAT vehicle for law enforcement. It's very different from your MRAP, which is more, I would say, akin to a urban tank versus your Bearcat.
The MRAP is a slightly modified, repurposed military vehicle, okay? They're loud as hell because military doesn't care how loud they are. They're slow moving and they're not nimble. A Bearcat is smaller, more nimble, quieter, designed solely for police work. The best analogy I can give you, in one prior agency, we had helicopters prior to the Great Recession, and they were repurposed Army helicopters. And the officers had to fly them extra high because they were so loud. And they had old FLIR and just bad equipment. If you spend a ton of money on a helicopter designed, engineered, and built for police purposes, you can fly at low altitudes because they're whisper quiet, state-of-the-art technology. That's kind of the difference between an MRAP and a Bearcat. And because they're built by a private vendor, the US government has no say in their purpose or use.
I just wanted to commend the staff, the things I brought up last week at the council meeting, the toilet seat and the weeds and stuff up on, oh, that toilet seat was gonna fall off.
Yeah, it wasn't gonna be a man, it's gonna fall off.
You sit on that thing.
Not that often, but you all have to. So.
That was
I
a
was
significant
looking at-
pinch hazard.
That's right. So, but more importantly, the weeds and stuff along Peoria, that median looks way better. And so, I'm all for letting them know when something's wrong. But when they get it fixed, I'm also gonna be for making sure that they get commended for taking care of it.
Appreciate
So,
that.
thank you.
And I know they'll appreciate it when I share that with them tomorrow, so appreciate that.
That's all I got.
Yeah, I do appreciate the work on all the weeds. Some of these national forests
Yeah.
are getting cut down, so.
I sent Benjamin a text at work. You wouldn't believe it. They're cutting weeds all over Commerce City.
We found a herd of elk.
I thought you were gonna say you found my cousin. I thought you were gonna say you found my cousin Yeti in the.
No, you guys did find somebody, wasn't we?
Oh, I know where it was. I know where it was. It was around the perimeter of the Arsenal. And suddenly you could see the bike lane. I mean, it just looks beautiful there. And you could see crew, Commerce City crew in there getting out trash. And it was just so encouraging. And, you know, now my C3 makes sense.
I think what's beneficial for us is we heard it extremely directly from you all about, hey, this is what we want to get done. And our staff is willing to step up to that challenge and take the steps necessary to try to get that done. So the more we have that communication, the more we understand that directly from you all, it makes it easier for us to be able to try to hit that target. So appreciate your guidance and your direction on, hey, toilet seat, gotta have sturdy base, or hey, please, we need to get this done. So appreciate the guidance as well.
Well, on that topic though, the other thing that I would like to highlight is I just was talking to some parents that have kids that play football at Frontier, football practice. And I'm sure this is in other parts around the city as well. It's plush. It looks fantastic. So the thatching or the dethatching and everything that happened earlier in the season when we were all complaining, you know, I don't know, June. It looks fantastic now. And they were saying that, you know, that's a safety thing as well. When you start adding, you know, sports, soccer, football, anything like that, we all know how quickly that can go bad with bad turf. And so it is a great job. I mean, it is a good job turnaround. We've heard over and over the challenges we've had with staffing. And so the other thing is the golf course.
Yeah,
looks fantastic. Like, of course, we're still recovering some issues that are not in play. I think that's probably the biggest thing. We have some issues with a couple greens, but you know, Steve and I were talking about it when we were golfing at the golf tournament for Reunion Elementary this weekend. You can see the changes that are being made in the size of the green. They're cutting a smaller green, which makes it a more challenging course. I'm not opposed to that. But they're just eliminating the spot that died and has a Band-Aid on it right now. That'll grow back, it'll get real tall and plush, and then you can cut it back to a green if you'd like to. But those seem to be those decisions, wherever they're coming from, seem to be making a lot more sense than the approach that we had before. And you can see hole 14 was closed, but that's because there was actively people working on it, and that was great to see as well. But you can see the benefits, whether it's because we have less worry about water or whatever the case may be, or just seasonal rain. But those types of things do make a big difference, I think, in the incremental positive change that we all want to see.
Appreciate that, sir.
Can I ask quickly, what was the place where you were talking about, you met with people to look at the traffic?
That was 64th and Olive.
64th and Olive. Awesome. Wonderful.
And I know that we've been communicating about 96, Telluride, Reunion, Parkway. Obviously, that's an ongoing effort. You know, we're going to continue to keep, staying on top of that. And I will share with you, staff is also planning to go out and meet with the community this week to kind of just on site and have those conversations. So, like I said, we're trying to be more dynamic in our approach.
Thank you.
Indeed. I did the drive today myself again, and getting out of Landmark going north to make a turn west would be taking your life in your hands. And I don't think anybody took that into account when that road was put in. It's on a curve over a bridge, it's going down slope, and all these vehicles are coming up. I, of course, went right, but there's some things that were designed into it that are a problem for 96. And I'm so glad that we're addressing it. 4 accidents in a month we had reached crazy level for sure. So thank you so much for responding so quickly to it. And I also want to thank Jim, because those big signs are up on empty parcels with notifications of public hearings. Thank you very much. Yes, so I have now, I also took sign pictures this afternoon to post on social media and say, this is what these signs mean to you and why they came about. It's because you wanted to see bigger signs and to have Spanish on them. So thank you very much for accomplishing that. I know that there's been, we haven't had council reports in weeks because there hasn't been time, or I would have said something earlier, but anyway, so thank you very much for that too. It's very much appreciated.
Councilmember Douglas, if you saw a sign that far, let CD know, let planning know, so the planner can contact that development, and then they have to go up and get their sign back in shape. That's on the.
I'm sure it just blew over.
The applicant's responsibility to
That's how I
get
took
that,
pictures.
get that there.
Upside down.
But if we don't know, we can't tell them. If we don't know, then public doesn't know either.
But if she said they might have been up today, what, the signs?
On where?
On
104th,
104th.
south side.
Signs on 104th.
Isn't that what you took pictures
What
of?
new project is on 104th? The ones on Peoria? At Potomac?
Blackhawk.
No,
Yeah, Commons at 104th.
it's between Blackhawk.
That's
and
comments at
Potomac.
104.
Yeah.
Have they fallen over?
They'll get with the developer.
We'll check them and see.
I'll tell you.
I was talking about the signs now that are Tower and Settlers Road,
Okay,
because they happen to be my ward.
gotcha.
People who other council members have to take care of their ward. I'm noticing my ward.
If you do see them that are blown over, let me know, because I would think about changing the standard to make them plant them in the ground instead of what you're doing, we're having that, we're having the monochrome.
Settlers Crossing stake, they're metal stakes, that look.
Yeah, some of them are wooden, some of them are wooden, so.
Yeah,
we're trying
yeah,
to
I
make
saw
them
that.
stay.
Okay, you were gonna get us an update on the Tower Road right turn lanes.
Still working on getting that information, Mayor. It's a little bit more convoluted, complex, and trying to pull the documentation from when and how that all came about from 5 to 7 years ago of how we internally ran that project. So if you don't mind bearing with us a little bit more as we collect that from different places.
When will the winter banners be going up?
That's a good question. We'll have to talk with community relations at PW.
We just voted on those in a survey 2 weeks ago at most. So they probably aren't quite made yet.
So the city signs, I can.
Oh, you,
Cultural council. Yeah, cultural council. We got a survey, that's, so the different size than we have now, we're planning that.
and I do want to let the city council know because of our vote, and especially Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas, the vote that expanded money to the boards and commissions. The senior commission made great use of their money. Thus far, they have given away 158 box fans to low-income seniors in Commerce City. We did that in person at the food bank and at Eagle Point. And so that worked out really well. And then most recently, last week, we visited at Kearney Plaza and encountered very similar problems that were encountered at Contour Estates and Village Crest. So although we would typically wait a month for our download, because of an email that Jason sent out to all of us about the steps that were being taken about the other low-income properties, I went ahead and sent a combination of notes of myself and another person to him so that they could incorporate them if they were going to be talking to the housing authority or to Chafa. I wanted everybody to take a look at it instead of having two conversations because it was, anyway, it's in those notes.
Mr. Hayden, would you like to give your report?
I don't have a whole lot to comment on, just let you know that Sarah Geiger, Ashley Locker, and I were able to attend the CML conference law seminar last Friday and Saturday out in Grand Junction. So that was a good opportunity for us to keep up on our continuing legal education requirements and meet with a lot of other colleagues from our community. I can tell you that one thing that was really not surprising, but also very disappointing to hear is that every municipality is struggling with the hiring and retention of law enforcement. And there were 140 municipal lawyers at this conference. Obviously there were multiple from some jurisdictions, but it is something that our fellow municipalities are experiencing that same struggle. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't really have anything else that I know of that to get you posted on right now, but if you have any questions, let me know.
Is there any questions for Mr. Hayter? Mr. Rogers?
As we were talking about, I got a text from Travis Honey. Our fall banners should be going up in the next few weeks with winter banners to follow after Thanksgiving.
I can tell you that there was a contract that took a while for me to get to that with the vendor to put those up. I think that was just finally approved like last week as well. So that might, if there was a delay, it might have been it getting through my office.
So you have against Christmas?
You better skip
I'm not touching that one.
What do you have against fall? What do you have against being cheerful?
Back at you. Sorry.
Oh, we're adjourned now.
I didn't get my report in.
All right, any council members having a report to make, they can do so in under 30 seconds. Mayor Pro Tem.
I just have a request. I don't know how everyone else feels, but if we're gonna be having study sessions in here, these are the most uncomfortable chairs.
Yeah.
If we can.
They're not back in there.
Can
Can we have the chairs that were in the other room?
These
Is
are
there a
1 hour
reason?
chairs, not 4 hour chairs.
Yeah, we used to have different chairs in here, like obviously before we vacated this room for study sessions.
Out there.
Yeah.
Well then.
Yeah, so they're all around that table now.
Yes.
Yes, but someone can switch them around once a week.
That table's gonna be going.
Councilmember Douglas.
The chairs can come back.
All right, so,
These are chairs for the chambers.
Councilmember Douglas has the floor.
Oh,
It's okay.
It's all right.
share it with them.
She has to get it right with you.
No, I.
Oh, you have another way? Oh, okay, in that case, I apologize.
So Tuesday morning after the late night on Monday, Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas and I did a count tour, and I'm telling you, thank you so much. I mean, I want to do that a lot because I just learned so much, and I just really enjoyed it, and I want to do it as often as possible. Steve Timms drove, and yeah, it was just great. So then on Wednesday, I did the environmental justice listening session with the CDPHE. It was supposed to be at Adams City High School, but there was a volunteer the night before, and so they did it virtually. They did most of the talking, so I don't know how much of a listening tour it was or session it was, but and then on Thursday, I went to a presentation on the impacts of pollution to asthma. And it was very, very it was almost sad though to know how kids are impacted by the minute particles that are distributed through industry and how dangerous it is. So when we talk about air quality and what we need to do to clean up the air, it's because what we're doing to our kids with pollution is we're not handing them anything good for their futures, for their kids. It's got to stop somewhere. So that was very enlightening, and I'm glad I went to that, even though I missed the kids' first thing, but this to me was more important. And then on Saturday, did the Yeti golf tournament, and that was really fun. And had a great time hanging out with Cousin Hurst's family. It was great. So that's my report, and it was not 30 seconds, but thank you.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, my daughters are still happy that I was being mean, I guess.
I see you.
I went to IBTTA, which is International Bridge Tunnel and Turnpike Association with E470, as we've done several times. The only reason there was interest, not the only reason, the main interest for me was E470 received a award for essentially the only toll road in the country that's reducing tolls at this time. The 3-year policy is still to continue to reduce tolls on E470, even in this kind of crazy time. And so that's the goal. It may be frozen for 6 months if, there's some discussion happening, but it's still on the trajectory of downward. And so that's where I was at last week. I thought it was a good showing, good representation for E470 to show that the work that they're doing is, from a financial standpoint, continuing to try to be what's best for our municipalities on the corridor. So just thought I'd report on that.
Councilmember Noble.
Yep, thank you. Let's see, I'm also really pleased with the way the comp plan tour went, and I specifically asked to go by sites that the state has targeted for legislation with regards to air pollution, fence line air monitoring, et cetera. So I went to Suncor, Phillips, Conoco, Sinclair, and this wasn't the same, but it was the hazardous waste processor Veolia, which I didn't realize we had something that extensive. And also by the Dumont Magellan pipeline facility east of 85. I didn't know that is in unincorporated Adams County. You would think that's right smack in the middle of Commerce City, but in fact it's not. And we also located the 4 abandoned RVs and a boat, and are glad that there is now a place to put them. I took, Steve Tim stopped the vehicle so I could take pictures and send it into the city. Like Christie, I was on the environmental justice listening tour, and I did speak as an individual. South Lawn Elementary ribbon cutting. I'm so excited to see that school open. That was the official ribbon cutting, but it's been open for a while. The Metro District Community Information Meeting was very well run. I really appreciated that. And then I had someone who had a special question regarding why he's part of NIGID after being annexed. So I wanted to pursue that last Monday during council reports, but we didn't have time. But Cheryl has helped me out with that, so that's good. And I had a meeting with the director of the Council on Aging. Commerce City is one of 3 cities in the region that were surveyed regarding senior needs and issues. And the answers to that survey will be available around the end of November. So we will have a specific report with regards to Commerce City. The reason this is important is because the senior population is actually outpacing the younger population. There are just not as many births, and so if we're not making plans for dealing with the senior population in Commerce City, then we're missing the boat. And I would say the 70th anniversary, really well run. Oh, and I attended the CML district dinner. And as I mentioned before, the AC rep URA tour of I-25 corridor, and Commerce City will be on the next tour, URA tour. Anyway, so, and I left some things on. It's been a busy few weeks.
Any others? Everybody have a good night. See you next week.
Well, something that we've talked about.
I hate these. Why are they saying things?
You know what else makes